What's up, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
Not too bad. Long time no see, Jason. How's it going?
I know, man. Pretty good. How are you?
Not too bad.
Kind of fell off the radar for a while.
Yeah, life's busy.
Hello, Grace. I'm Jason.
Hi, Jason. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Where are you located?
I'm in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Here it's getting
He
pretty.
lives next door to Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My lease is up in July and I'm out, so that's how Austin's going.
No shit.
Yeah. We're trying to our mayor's really trying to become the Portland of the South. He's trying really hard.
That's what I've heard. I have a
I'm
search.
honestly.
I have a search that's happening in Austin, for a chief technology officer, and the people we've been asking to take the job are like, Austin, no, sorry, not gonna move there. So pretty bad from what I hear.
Where are you?
I'm in Atlanta.
Okay, nice. Yeah. Yeah, I use this I've only been here for, 4 or 5 years, but 20 years. This city was amazing and wonderful, and it's just you know, your typical progressive dystopian nightmare.
What's actually been going on in Austin?
Last summer they ended the homeless camping thing. So homeless are just camping like everywhere, openly in the city, even like on sidewalks. We defunded the police. Um, Went through that recently. We have a
So it's
really
just like the suburbs.
yeah. We got a real radical city council that's no good.
Where are you gonna go?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I would love to sink somewhere down further in Texas Hill Country because it's beautiful and remote. But who knows? It's gonna be hard. I won't be able to leave Texas. I'll find somewhere a little. It's not all jacked up here.
Are you Texan by birth?
Yes.
I was gonna say your accent gave you away for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even people here are like, "Dude, where are you from?" I'm like, right here, man.
Well, isn't Austin the new Silicon Valley, essentially? Like,
Yeah, they're working on it. And that's another thing is all these Californians coming in, oh, and I'm like, dude, why don't you come here and do the same thing? That makes no sense. Like, there's a reason you left that place.
Yeah, they're just like, why is rent so high? Why are all these homeless people here? I don't know. Anyway, let's get the hell out of here.
Darndest thing.
Let's go to the next place. I don't know. I'm I don't see like a return to normal, I guess. Like I see this as a lot of this is permanent, as like this is a socially defining movement. I think 2021 is going to look wildly different, and I don't think there's like a going back. I think we're just in an uncontested sort of revolution, and it's only not violent because everybody's consenting. So it's like, oh, this is easy, but consent doesn't seem to be an option. It seems like, this is what the Long March has been about. This is why you take over institutions, is for this moment right here. And
Right.
I think that it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And you better start getting your real estate out of the country here shortly. But I don't know. I've seen that. I feel like I've seen this for 4 years. Like I've had my thumb on the pulse. Like, okay, I felt like Trump was just kind of a move to create a caricature of like capitalism and conservatism that you could run socialism against. And then when the whole thing just fell and collapsed and we enter kind of a new Great Depression, then we can rebuild in kind of a new image. And I would put money. In fact, I probably will put money on October something, a crash, an epic crash that is like the final death blow right before. There'll probably be like an October surprise, and then people will realize that we're about to go 100% full on socialist, and then the stock market was like, meow, and then it'll be over.
Well, I'll tell you what, I saw it coming like years ago. In fact, in 2012, I made the decision to leave the country. Like I left the country in 2012 with the intention of, I got a job with a company. It was going to rotate countries every few years until I found somewhere that was remote enough, and I was just going to hang out there. But obviously situations forced me back over here. But I lived in China, you know, for a bit. I sought refuge in communist China. So, and then I was transferred to third world Benin, which is kind of the birthplace of slavery. So those situations really formed and shaped me. And now I'm back here. I'm telling people, I'm like, you know, this is why I left this country years ago. I saw this was coming, you know, it's just this gradual process, like you said, Jack, but we're in
I
it
honestly
now.
don't see a future in the States, even without COVID and the little cultural revolution that we're going through. There's just too many poison pills. There's just too many things that are just going to take the economy out. You know, the Ponzi scheme of Social Security, even with all the unfunded liabilities and debts that we have.
Hey, I've been paying into Social Security my whole life. That's my insurance fund, my money that I paid in. It's like,
by the way, congratulations on finally buying a lamp.
Yeah. It took a minute. This was supposed to be my trial and error time.
Get you off the witness protection program.
Yeah.
I did some some horrible math of like, what would it look like if you weren't robbed 13% of every single paycheck?
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
for like
you don't even,
years.
yeah, no.
And just like conservative S&P, you know, it's
Even
like,
a crap
wow,
CD.
40 grand all my life, just 40 grand every single year. And just had the most average conservative investments. Didn't do anything above, no 401ks, no nothing. I'm coming out with close to $2 million, like $2 million. And then if you could probably just live off basic gains from that, and then not even deplete your savings. Or you can just have like 20 grand for the rest of your life until you die, and you're still making 20 grand like 30 years in. But whatever.
But then that means you could actually retire, and you wouldn't have to rely then on Social Security or a pension or Medicare, you know, Medicaid. So
have to have that carrot we can dangle just out of reach.
Yeah, who votes the most again? Which segment of the population always make sure to go out and vote?
Right.
So
it's one of those things that makes me like, I sometimes think like, were things always this dumb, or is this like particularly dumb? But then you realize that they literally allowed like a massive Ponzi scheme to be passed, and people were like, this is fine. We got to help the seniors. And we all have to live with it now. Well,
when I realized that there's a large section of the population that considers reason and logic tactics, it was like, yeah, we've reached that point of dumb.
Yeah, Jason is like a part of the curriculum process for like K through 12. Don't worry, we're not on like any kind of Facebook Live yet. So this is the warm up stage.
Hey, I'm about ready to take that thing down anyway. I'm all up in the wokeness and the equity movement and
God save you. Are you in public K-12 or are you in private?
Public.
Oh, geez.
Austin, you know.
God.
Yeah.
Oh, it's hell.
And so my job title, to show you like how in the wokeness I am, I'm in the social and emotional learning department.
No, what does that mean? No.
Well, when I joined that, it was new, and I saw that as these are the skills to really teach the individual, to really fortify the individual, but they're all collective and like I'm like, oh, they don't really like me anymore. But
I'm
it's
shocked.
funny.
Yeah, no. I mean,
Yeah,
you're white, you're a man, so that
and he outed
automatically
himself as
dispels.
like a capitalist pro-American person. And
Yes.
they hate
And,
him.
and I got to the only black guy on our team, and he's like, "Yeah, you're right, dude." And he started speaking up too, and they don't really understand the fact that my best friend is a black guy, but to them I'm promoting white supremacy.
Well, it's this weird thing where the racism is so deep and so ingrained that whenever they encounter something like that, it's just like does not compute.
No.
Like it all just shuts down. And like you
My
can't hold
racist
those
button's
views.
not working. What the hell?
Yeah, yeah, you can't hold those views. You're black. You're not allowed. And it's like I'm pretty sure he or she or whoever can think whatever damn well please. But
Yeah, and I just it's on a Rio magazine now, but I just wrote an article that explains how this actually cultivates human acts of prejudice, aggression, and cruelty, and how this movement is actually making those acts worse.
Hmm.
that's been my thing the whole time along, right? Like we want things to be better for insert minority group. Like, yeah, that's cool. I'm down with that. I want people to have civil rights. Okay, what are we gonna do? Well, we're gonna start off by othering people as hard as we possibly can and creating as many tribal divisions and binaries as we can and segregating people into those groups. I'm like, that is the antithesis of how you build coalitions to make positive change. So either you are catastrophically stupid or deliberately misleading, and you're just hiding behind a veneer of good intentions.
Or both, you know.
Or both, yeah.
Your mind's just so rotted up with that stuff it can't help itself.
Well, did you, Jason? Did you catch any of what like we did as far as like the first video? What
I did not.
you weren't part of our massive ratings that we had a week ago?
No, I was not.
Man, the what'd you guys think, Josh and Grace, of our video that Grace did the majority of the talking towards the end?
I thought Grace was phenomenal. Actually, full disclosure, I was going through, I watched the whole thing at least once through, and like the three of you all generate great content, and I'm like, man, I am like the dead weight dragging this thing down. I got to get my shit together.
No,
You had
no,
a big
it
line
was
of Coke before you
fun.
start.
Right? Well, I've got my High West double rye to try out here, so we'll see if
I'll be some dead weight tonight too, so don't worry.
I don't know. I set the bar pretty low. You're gonna have to really bend down far to get underneath that one.
Well, I figured. So that like we spent the first hour talking about kind of the first whole subject, and then the second hour was literally one line on the subject, which was just the initial like scientific revolution and the church as far as the Enlightenment. And those are areas I didn't really know shit about. So I was just like, oh, I want to know this. So then it just became like, well, let's dig further and whatnot. So I feel like there's some stuff I can contribute on, but I think for this one, instead of like asking a question and being like, Josh, what do you think? And then, he's like, I don't know. And then it works its way back to Grace. Then I think if we ask Grace first, and then, when somebody says something and you're like, oh, shit, and it kind of like jogs stuff in your head, It'll allow us to jump in and say, here's kind of an open-ended question. Here's that reminds me of a thing that I wanted to tell or say. And so I think that would be a better order. Let you tee it off, and then other people can jump in, ask follow-up questions and whatnot. And so to anybody, if a good question pops in your head, that's relatively similar to the topic that we're talking about, jump in. Don't be afraid to step on my toes or anything. I hate being the lead-in guy. So any time that someone comes in and like ask a question, I'm like, sit back and not do anything. So I feel like a fish out of water. I just want to be someone that just sits there and then waits for like, oh, this is my moment, and chime in and
Yeah.
crack
I
a
know
joke
we
or be
had
like
discussed
tell a
where
story.
I would kind of be the prompter and you would be the color commentary guy, and we ended up like inverting that and just kind of rolled with it from there on.
Yeah, I
Um,
know. We didn't really talk about that, but
yeah, which is fine. Can you put the link to the outline in the convo again? I meant to bookmark that last time and I forgot to.
in the message,
Yeah.
in the
And now it's like 8 million pages back because we all talk way more than I would have anticipated. I was like, oh, I'll just scroll up to it. And I scrolled for like 10 minutes and it's like, oh, this is where Jack sent out his cut of the intro video. Like, holy shit, this is like a quarter of the way there.
yeah, my phone couldn't even load back that far.
Yep.
Let's see if I can find it. Oh, here we go. It's that Midwestern ope.
Oh,
Oh, did they do that in Texas? Is that purely a Midwestern thing?
That noise,
The ope?
like a Homer thing.
Someone made a meme out of that, and I realized that I say ope a lot, and I was
Yeah.
personally attacked.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, like oh, excuse me, like if you bump into somebody,
Yeah,
like
it's sort of like oops, but also oh, and comes out oh.
oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
it's a Midwestern thing. It's just
And
a
it's
polite little like oh.
Yeah, like that and ranch dressing. You realize you do it way more than you ever would have thought.
Isn't that all what the Midwest is, essentially?
And corn.
Much
And corn. That's right. We established that last time. That's right.
non-edible corn.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, the best.
ethanol corn. Gotta get those sweet, sweet farm subsidies.
I was gonna say, yay.
All right, did that show up? Do you have the
Yeah, I'm there now. Thank you very much.
outline? So, yeah, I guess so. Obviously we're not going to make people experts on what we're talking about, and so I think what we want to do is kind of provide a framework. We're establishing like a big argument about the Enlightenment being the underlying philosophy of classical liberalism, of our political views of America, and so we're kind of sharing that story of America from the light that we like it. We think the revolution was a good thing, and the prosperity and everything, the individualism, the freedom. We're proponents of that. And so, what is America is kind of that story. And I want to obviously tell it until we get to like 1913, basically, of like this glimmer of hope of setting it up of this beautiful place, and then what went wrong, basically, and talk about the long march, neo-Marxism, just the progressive era, from the Federal Reserve and income tax to FDR to LBJ, and so that one I'm really excited about because that's where I'm interested in the negative. I'm a negative person, and so that's where all my resources are. And this is one that I like. I have some stuff, but I'm not a history buff. I'm not. I don't have a good memory, so I'm not a very good like. Here, let me tell you like a knowledgeable story because I just forget. So I just get like I'm a gist guy. I get rules and I establish stuff based on those rules, and then I go from there. And so nobody would want to listen to me talk for 2 minutes about anything. But the critical theory, the long march, I'm really excited about that one. That's the one that I don't think the story has been told. I think we just say things like, oh, BLMs, that's a Marxist movement, or, that's just a postmodernist, whatever. But what do these words mean? What do these things mean? And let's not just get away with saying they infiltrated the institutions. Let's be specific and say they did this group did this group did this, because the story is fascinating. And I really want to dig into it. I've gotten way more into it than I had ever envisioned. And that's our argument. That's our argument for what is taking place. Because when we zoom out, what this looks like is what I think the Enlightenment being rejected by postmodernism. And I know postmodernism is kind of like 1960s on, but I think postmodernism is like a more generic description of the philosophy as a whole, which is just kind of the rejection of the Enlightenment on the basis that it has a lot of baggage from religious fundamentalism. It's rooted in God, and so if you completely reject God, then you don't have much of a basis for anything. So things tend to be about power because people just see things through their own privilege, yada yada yada. But that is, I think, this is the underlying struggle. I think we're seeing the end of the Enlightenment, and we're seeing this new chaotic world of postmodernism take over, which unfortunately is just a luxury kind of set of views that can only exist in a functioning society. It's purely a tear down, rejection based philosophy. But I think that's why this 2020 is the transition from Enlightenment to postmodern America. And I don't think postmodern America is a very good place that we'd want to live in, which is why I'm going to Panama when all this gets bad. So, but that's kind of how I thought of framing it. And America's going to start, it's going to be a happy story presented in kind of like Hong Kong sees this as whatever. And then at the end of this, we are no longer the America that Hong Kong thinks that we are. So that's kind of the story arc that I envisioned. And I don't know, is that a valid take? Does that, pretty much agree with that kind of underlying battle or something else?
I'm good with that.
Yeah, no, although I will say that I hate to burst the bubble, but as I was preparing and going back through my notes and my readings, I was seeing again the seeds of postmodernism philosophy. At least I saw the seeds of how it comes to be in Enlightenment thinking, how people can take some of the ideals of the Enlightenment, of rationality and reason and modernity itself, and then take it to its what they think eventually is its natural conclusion, which is nihilism and rejection of all certainty and hardcore subjectivism and collapse of morality. So that did depress me a little bit when I was going back. I was like, yes, I see the trajectory now of how people got here. So the seeds of its demise were within its birth, unfortunately, in a lot of ways.
Well, maybe since modernity and skepticism were part of the American Enlightenment, also reason and liberty, so maybe those two little aspects were maybe little cracks, but when you consider reason and liberty as part of this 4-quadrant thing that was American Enlightenment, you can tell those postmodernists to F off.
Well, that's the problem, right? When you lose those two, you are left with the moral quagmire we're now in.
Right.
Sadly.
Setting up the Facebook Live, so.
Oh, yeah.
Just know the world is watching.
Hang on just a second there. I had some weirdness happen with my account. I might have to pop out and pop back in.
For Zoom?
Yeah. Give me.
How you getting that background?
Virtual backgrounds, man.
Oh wow.
Give me just a second. I'm gonna pop out and back in.
Okay.
I wore a t-shirt to match my wall.
I wore pants this time.
I really planned for this.
I'm in my bedroom, so my dogs won't get in the video. They would be on top of me the entire time trying to give their thoughts and opinions, which are not very coherent or articulate. So
they're leftist?
Yes, they're purely emotion driven. So yes, they do count as that. They're very tribal too. They're very obsessed with power dynamics, especially my German Shepherd. Yeah, so that's her obsession for sure. She's literally banging on my door trying to get in as we speak.
So you're a teacher, is that right?
I was.
Okay.
I left teaching. I started grad school when literally the first week of grad school for me was the Ferguson
Oh wow.
scenario, the drama. So that kicked off then a lot culturally, and especially across academia. And then I became a private school teacher, but that was also full of nefarious people. So, yeah, private is not necessarily always as safe as public.
Yeah. I learned that from overseas.
Yeah.
All right, we are live, so everything that you say can and will be used against you.
I'm already on the chopping block. I know they're going to come for me eventually. So,
Used against you in a kangaroo court of public opinion.
yeah, I'm just surprised it hasn't happened yet. So,
None of you are in Australia, hopefully, because they will
yes.
I
come
saw
for
that.
you. That's our future, man. That's scary.
I plan on being the funniest guy in the gulag.
I'll be the guy getting hung, being like, first time? All right. Should be on the page. Feel free to share it.
I am
Yep,
sharing.
it's up there. We've got 5 people watching currently.
Really?
It's the 4 of us plus somebody else.
I was gonna say I know I'm one of them, so
Yeah,
gotta,
I need to get off now.
gotta pump up them numbers.
All right. Put that away. Okay, cool. So, yes, we are on to America Part 2. We briefly got into the Enlightenment, and we got into the very first step, which was talking about how it began, how we went from kind of religious fundamentalism into the Age of Reason, into the Age of Enlightenment, which was a scientific revolution. As we started to learn more about the world, we realized that it wasn't as simple as just saying God created it, God took care of it, and there became kind of this natural curiosity that took place, and people wanted to observe and apply sciences and reason to how human beings interacted. And you also have the Protestant Reformation, which was kind of a rejection just based on some of the rules and the irrationality of the church. And so that's where we're at. And I did mention that I wanted to get into Thanksgiving, but maybe we'll hold off. We'll hold off on that one. So let's jump into the Enlightenment. No, screw it. We're gonna get into Thanksgiving. I said it, we're gonna do it. So when we talked about the Native Americans, what it was like, let me preface this by saying we're presenting the story of America, but we are very aware of the critical theory view of the United States. And so for much of this, I would like to address that kind of rejection, critical, where you just complain about something on a very small nugget of truth just because you want to dismiss it. And it's an effective tactic to say, like, okay, I don't like the Enlightenment, I don't like capitalism, so if I can just undermine the whole thing by oversimplifying it and then rejecting it outright because it's built on white supremacy, or it's built on racism, or it's built on stolen land, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because point to a country that literally is the same country throughout the history of time, is the same group of people. The world history is one of stolen land and conquest. It just is. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's what our kind of mental opponent is, and so some of this I want to address from that perspective. And so let me start out with Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving is one of those things that's on the chopping block to be like, oh, we're going to get rid of this and celebrate, we were mean white people day, or whatever the new proposed holiday is. And so I want to get into what Thanksgiving is, because I think the factory 5th grade model is that it was just Europeans and Pilgrims and Native Americans holding hands and singing songs, and they had such a joyous relationship, and they just decided to eat and whatever, and do the make turkeys out of their hands. And then the college view is that, it was just Native American genocide. The Europeans came in and just chopped off all their heads, and then, they're all dead. And then, but just for Thanksgiving, what is it? What is Thanksgiving? Why do we celebrate it? What's the truth behind Thanksgiving? Let's start with anybody who wants it.
Does anyone particularly want to throw out? I kind of want to hear, though, too, people's perceptions of Thanksgiving, because there's certainly strong historical facts of what happened and occurred, but there's also really good perceptions too. So I'm curious what people think of when they think of Thanksgiving.
Well, I guess maybe I can kick that off as representing the kind of everyman, right? So we all have the like Charlie Brown Christmas style understanding of Thanksgiving, which is, I assume, ubiquitous across much of America, at least for my generation and some older. Which the basic story goes, we had the Pilgrims, or the original European settlers, arrived. They didn't do so great, and they were kind of on the struggle bus leading into winter, and they were able to arrange some sort of a truce or gesture of benevolence on behalf of the indigenous people, and they had this grand feast of plenty where everyone got plenty of food, and they sort of shared resources, and there was much singing and dance, and everyone sang Kumbaya around a very large fire and stuff like that, which is a very convenient, like, child's holiday special synopsis of what I suspect is a vastly different historical occurrence. So let's lead in from treat me like I'm 5 perspective, and maybe go into a slightly more authentic versioning of historical events.
I can give it like maybe a 10-year-old's perspective, and then hopefully it can like work its way up from there. Hopefully we don't end at 10-year-old.
Yeah, I can see 10 and raise you 12. After that, I gotta tap out.
No, I'll just go 15. I'll go a little higher, and we'll skip 10. So I guess I learned it as a celebration of capitalism in a way, and a celebration of private property. Feel free to fact check me, because I'm very limited on this, but this is just what I know. This is my truth. This is my personal truth.
Oh, okay. Well then,
and
can't debate it then.
It is as valid as anything historians can say.
And so it's if I know correctly, John Smith, Roanoke, I believe, and they.
Jamestown.
My truth. Don't.
Oh, you're right. No, you're absolutely right.
Get out of here with your facts.
No, it's Roanoke. That's what we're going with. And they had a commune, basically. They just a bunch of pilgrims that kind of took it upon themselves to all farm and to all work the land. And it was kind of a disaster. It was kind of like the model of a hippie commune, or a communal kind of farming kind of thing. It didn't encourage anybody to produce. It was just kind of this, we all eat, we all farm. And it was a disaster. John Smith kind of changes his plan. He divides the lot where every individual has their own spot of land to farm. And basically you produce, you eat. If you don't produce, you don't eat. And it was a success. And people produced. They had an abundance, and they had, obviously you have colonies and different groups of Europeans that did have positive, good relationships with natives. It wasn't just this monolithic. It wasn't just Europeans, and it wasn't just natives. They had natives that they were in alliance with, and natives that they were enemies with. And so I don't know what tribe was nearby, but it was one that they were in trade with and had a positive relationship with. And it was just basically a celebration of abundance from Roanoke. So if we want to build up from there, be my guest.
I'm sorry to burst people's bubbles. There are debates about Thanksgiving, since it's kind of hard to trace Thanksgiving specifically back to one event, because the origins of Thanksgiving are very religious, meaning that this is very difficult for a lot of, when I say modern, I mean contemporary people to understand. But the Christian way of life was, for most of Christianity, broken into a liturgical way of life, meaning you followed the church calendar, and under the church calendar you followed feast and fast days, right? So feasting and fasting, periods of the church when you go through and you abstain from certain foods out of reverence and a belief that it helps equip you to be holy in preparation for certain holy days like Easter or Christmas, for example. And so what do we know about early Americans, early colonists, was that they came from predominantly Christian cultures, right? They came from the UK, which was predominantly Anglican. Of course, the Puritans were kind of a break off of that. They were radical reformers. They weren't people who liked the Church of England by any means, but they still kept a lot of the feast and the fast days, right? It was a way around which they formed life. Life was according to the church and the different seasons of the church. So that meant there were periods, particularly in the fall, which is historically when a lot of Europeans would have harvest festivals or festivals celebrating, right, the change of seasons, kind of from that summer to fall and then winter. It's when they would have those times. And right, what do you do when you've fasted and then you feast? You give thanks to God. That's what Thanksgiving is. But where it then comes in specifically the American context, I would say, is definitely the relationship with the native tribes, with whom there were some good relationships, and some relationships built on cooperation and interest and mutual benefit and help, right? It's not just the either or of, oh yeah, we sat around and we shared our food and we became best friends. And then a bunch of people died, but we don't know how that happened. But it's not the other opposite extreme, right? Of, yeah, it was just pure genocide and it's us celebrating us killing them. Um, it's more of just like a natural cultural occurrence that came out of that time period, and that has become more and more secular over time and has become more and more American, I'd argue, but that in its essence was just a reflection of the culture and the time period. At least that's my take on it.
And I almost feel just kind of skipping way ahead to the critique, I guess, criticism on Thanksgiving, understanding that the critical theorist, Marxists of the day, maybe the attack on Thanksgiving itself, is Thanksgiving is for family. It celebrates unity, and it's a celebration of capitalism. And this movement does not like the family. It does not like unity, and it most definitely does not like capitalism. So I almost wonder if the demonization of Thanksgiving is because of what it truly stands for. And Grace, I heard you say as it evolved to be this kind of unique American thing as well. And it is uniquely American. I had the privilege of cooking Thanksgiving dinner in Taiwan back in 2000 to people that were excited to participate in an American style Thanksgiving. So it's revered all over the world, as a matter of fact.
So to follow up on that, sorry, Jack. To
No,
tag
please.
along with that, in terms of reasons why it would be a ripe target for demonization, if there is a secular but still theological aspect to it, right? Like, so Thanksgiving, right? The whole purpose of that is to reflect on all that we've been given and to show gratitude. And it's a very humbling, it's intended to be a humbling gesture where we reflect back on all of our blessings, right? And the basis of critical theory is highly contrary to that, to say the least, right? Everything is problematic, everything has issues, everything is unacceptably flawed and must be rebuilt. And so that sense of grace and feeling grateful and blessed and all that is highly diametrically opposed to kind of the core basis for a lot of that thinking.
Right. Well, and everything's based on power, right? So if everything's based on power, then the very issue of giving thanks, particularly to a higher being, is very problematic, right? That A, you should be grateful, and B, that you should be grateful towards someone else, considering that you're in a state where things could be better and it's really not that good. And this was actually built off of a lot of, bullshit, for lack of a better term. I mean, I think that's a big part of the issue as well, is that very idea.
Is it fair to say, and we don't have to get this deep into this question, but it seems to be, I seem to catch the theme. Is there seem to be sort of a secular whitewashing of, or religious whitewashing of American history, like in terms of Thanksgiving? Does there seem to be kind of like a revisionist history that makes it seem like America wasn't so fundamentally religious? Because you hear about it, like the founding fathers being deists and not really being that religious, and then with Thanksgiving kind of being secularized. Is that a repeating theme where we seem to X that part out and not make it a part of American history?
Yeah, it's definitely complex because, unfortunately, especially after the 70s and kind of during the religious right revival, unfortunately, a lot of conservatives have mistakenly tried to go back and say, well, America was in its essence completely a Christian nation founded by God. That historically, hard to argue, because it's hard to argue that anything is historically founded by God. But it's very, 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 very asinine to ignore the influence that Christianity had on Western thought, philosophy, Enlightenment ideas, the Age of Reason, and particularly the cultures that make up the early United States and that make up the colonies in the Americas. You just can't. We don't appreciate how much of a part of the culture Christianity was, and we don't, especially because so many of us don't live that way now. Even a lot of practicing Christians, they go to church or they may read their Bible, but they can't appreciate that your whole world operated under Christianity, under the premise that God is in control and everything you have in life comes from him, and thus you're going to live your life in accordance with that. So there's definitely this, I would say, this propensity to ignore or to kind of whitewash the religious aspects, the theological underpinnings of a lot of American history, for sure.
And we touched on it last time of kind of how oversimplified the story of the natives and the Europeans are. Hundreds of years of history dismissed by whites coming in and killing off all the natives in some form of genocide. I mean, historically, 95% of natives were wiped out within the first 100 years from disease. It's a common occurrence in human history where new species meet and wipe out entire species. One of the things we touched on was the fact that they didn't really have horses, they didn't have cattle, they didn't have large animals, and so they were extremely prone to animal-based diseases. and that's essentially what wiped out most of them and kind of opened up the country for settlers to come in and feel like, wow, this is manifest destiny. I have this huge, massive country that just opened up for me. There's the the critical theory view seems to just take a small little nugget and make that truth. And so, even in the terms of disease, we tend to throw in the story of like blankets of Europeans were like just putting their face over a blanket and then handing them to natives. And I think there's one thing in history that caused that story to take place, and it was during the French and Indian War. It was a general that wrote about, and this is a couple hundred years into the vast majority of natives are no longer there. I think this is in the late 16, early 1700s, and just brought up the idea of like, okay, listen, we're in a war against this tribe. Obviously, we have tribes that are allied with us. It was brought up as a tactic. There was no proof of it even being used, but it just becomes one of those things that just gets stamped in history of this is part of the genocide theory, that they were just doling out blankets and knew about germ warfare in the 1500s. And it just kind of it becomes the worldview of people that do not like nuance. They just want to be right, or they want power, and they want to just dismiss. There seems to be like a propensity to dismiss if you don't want to discuss or debate, because it's really easy to do. It's really easy to just be like, oh, it's racist, it's this. I'm just going to dismiss it and feel like I'm intellectually superior. I don't even have to listen to anything you have to say, which is a good tactic if you don't know anything. I encourage all of you, if you want to win every argument, just dismiss your opponent. Don't expand your worldview, and you can feel really good about yourself. But one thing I did want to touch on, because obviously there was good relationships between Europeans and natives, and there were horrible relationships. I think one of the worst relationships between the natives and in the United States was by the United States government itself. Yeah. It seemed like that's when some of the more, Andrew Jackson and some of the more evil occurrences against the natives was taking place, especially the Plains and the Comanche, moving them out and taking their land. But I think that's what government is. That's when a state gets too large, especially a federal government, that's the story of federal government, is that they impose the will of the state on you. And if you don't accept that, it's not an option. And so we have that not just with native tribes, we have that with many groups of people that have tried to live independent of the state. How many times has an Amish farm been raided by the FDA because they weren't, playing by the same rules as Kroger or something like that? I mean, I personally have to, like, I'm a criminal because I get raw milk. That's one of the things we do here in Ohio. Is I illegally possess and maintain raw milk, contraband in my fridge right now.
How dare you?
Straight to the gulag, straight to jail.
Yeah, I'm outing myself to our 9 people, and I have to go to someone's house. There's some lady that just has a cooler and like a wagon. I don't know if it's a wagon. They probably have a truck, but they take all of like eggs and milk and cheeses and all kinds of stuff, and they drop it off at drop-off locations. So there's one in like this neighborhood, one in that neighborhood, one in that neighborhood, and then that person gets in contact with has 20 people that might come to their house on Thursday to pick up your raw milk cheese, your raw milk yogurt, your eggs. By the way, have you ever had a real egg? Any of you?
Yeah. So good.
All my life, I thought an egg was just a small yellow yolk until I bought eggs out of the back of someone's pickup truck, and it was a dark orange yolk, and I'm like, this is a bad egg. This egg went bad. I shouldn't have bought eggs out of someone's pickup truck. And it had a flavor. It had like a taste to it. It was delicious.
So good. It's so good.
I Googled it, and it said that's what a healthy chicken is. So all my life, I've been eating eggs from stressed out, horrible, unhealthy chickens.
Poor sad chickens.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the story of Native Americans.
No, that's a really good point that we're gonna run into throughout this series. I would argue what we're gonna run into is the issue of the power of a centralized government. And a lot of the issues that people have today in regards to racism and sexism and classism and all that, they're mad at the wrong entity. They're mad at other people. They're mad at certain groups of people, but they're usually not mad at the federal government. And they turn to the federal government to solve those problems, when in reality, federal government's usually the one who caused it, and then said, oh, no, we can fix it now. We can fix it now. So, which is totally a tactic to, divide us and keep us from seeing who the real enemy is. Because if we did, then we would be doing what Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers would be doing. We would be overthrowing them. So that's part of the insidious agenda.
That's our challenge, is redefining the battle as not white versus black,
right,
rich versus poor. It is people who want to be free versus people who want control over other people. That's our battle.
Well, and the part is that the movement admits that it is against liberalism. So people are, and the idea of the individual is once again becoming problematic. People view the individual as the problem, and they are craving bigger government to squash that individual. And that's one thing I can't wrap my brain around, why people are wanting to give more power and more authority and take away rights.
Yeah, it really is an interesting manipulation, right? Like it's, we're all, did you guys know we're all collectively poor because Amazon is really successful and Jeff Bezos has a lot of money? It's not because every dollar that passes through our hands is taxed 2 or 3 times on the way in and 4 times on the way out. It's because some guy who came up with a really effective marketing and sales distribution system has been very successful. And so to I guess to loop that back in and tying in with Native Americans and the government, if you want an example of how entrusting your fate to the government pans out, and the absolute tragedy of how Native Americans have been treated under the current system. So I have family whose church is very involved with some Native American reservations out west, and once a year they go out there and do a missions trip, and you talk about the most gut-wrenching, heartbreaking poverty and lack of opportunity, and how it's I'm sure a lot of people want to frame it that it's some sort of white empiricism trying to stamp out Native American culture, but it's really just people whose spirits are broken because they're kept in such an appalling circumstance generationally, and there's no semblance of opportunity to get out of it. Right, it's sort of a cultural imprisonment, if you will, and a resignation to an undesirable fate.
It's a feudal state.
Yeah.
It's essentially serfdom, living in a feudal state. Mm-hmm. Reservations are like poor vassal states of a massive nation, and of course, people are dispirited, and I mean the alcoholism and drug addiction rates on reservations is insane. And I mean, I've been thinking there's been so much anger and frustration about police treatment, obviously, of blacks and especially black men. And I was watching a documentary, gosh, maybe 6-8 months ago, about the amount of Native American women who go missing every year.
Yeah.
And the FBI is like, I don't know what to tell you. Like they just don't even investigate. They don't even care. They're like, oh, well, sorry. Good luck, you guys. And so it's like, well, again, you're surprised that agents of the state maybe are not going to care about you or not take care of you. Like they're, so, I mean, that's, yeah, because again, it's, I would argue it's a state of feudalism.
It's
Not
kind
free.
of like the same relationship between the federal government and black communities.
Yeah.
It's this, we're going to create policies that, like LBJ, of listen, these are going to destroy your families, these are going to destroy your communities, but it's going to be made in the appearance of helping you out. And so and then when things get bad, then we're still the ones helping you out. So we're going to somehow tell these people that, no, this is your true enemy, when your policies, like is it the American Indian Act, I believe, where yes, you have these reservations where these people can't sell their homes, they can't use the equity in their home to start a business, and so it just puts them in this economic purgatory that they can't get out of. That's purely an act of the federal government and progressive policy, particularly. And so it's a mirror image of what's going on in the black community, where no, your problem is this, not the policy that we just made that completely wiped out your family and discouraged businesses from being here, yada yada yada. Don't look at that. And it seems to be repeating itself. It truly is sad, and it is a travesty that's taking place.
Was it Reagan who said, was it the 9 most terrifying words in the English language? I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Here to help you.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So, yeah, let's now that we end on a happy note, we'll get into the Enlightenment. And when we zoom out, when we try to understand what's going on, why the world's coming to chaos, I think it's important to zoom out and analyze and frame what's taking place. And I think there's underlying philosophies, kind of a structural system, and then you have things that are built on top of that. And so we are the classical liberal society. That is what we are. We're classical liberals, and of and pertaining to liberty. We're not not liberals in the form of being liberal with other people's money. We're the classical form, freedom, and we're sitting on a foundation of the Enlightenment. That is our foundation. And there's a new ideology that's kind of coming in. It's postmodernism. It wants to get beyond modernity, and it rejects much of the wisdom of the Enlightenment, because it thinks that much as the Enlightenment was a rejection of the age of religious fundamentalism, postmodernism is a rejection of the Enlightenment, because they think that there's a lot of religious baggage still within the Enlightenment, defining objective reality, defining objective truth, objective wisdom, having objective beauty, with architecture and art as a whole. That's why there's a postmodern art movement, and it just looks like somebody pissing on a painting and then selling it for $1 million, or having a golden toilet that you name America. Because they reject, objective beauty standards. So it's a full-on rejection of the Age of Enlightenment and all the products of the Age of Enlightenment, and I think that's what's taking place. And it's not. Whereas the Age of Enlightenment, it built on religious fundamentalism, it took some stuff out and built from there. This is a pure rejection, down to language, down to man and woman, down to any bit of wisdom that we have. It's a pure nihilistic movement that is successfully uprooting something we all love, which is the Age of Enlightenment. And so I think it's important to zoom out and frame what is taking place in America in 2020. And so part of the reason why we're doing this is to kind of give a final send-off when, we have probably no ability to end what's taking place, but we can at least acknowledge the Enlightenment. And we're going to talk about what it is. We already touched on kind of how it began, and so I wanted to get into some of the key figures of the Enlightenment, because when we talk about America, the idea of America, the Constitution, the founding documents, these are not things that came about on their own. They weren't just boom. The founders just thought of this amazing government, this amazing country, and they put it on the paper. It has its roots in some in Rome, but a lot of it is the key figures in the Enlightenment. And so I wanted to start out. We'll start with you, Grace, because you are kind of our expert right now. And so
Sure.
who are some of the key figures of the Enlightenment? And you don't have to go like start with this one and break it all down, but just who are some of the key figures? Who's important? And kind of a succinct what their contribution was.
Yeah.
People that you want to
Well,
talk about.
yeah. Well, there. Yeah. I mean, this is a great topic, and yeah, it's very key to understanding who the who the main figures of the Enlightenment were, because they are so important in order to understand the founding of America, the founding fathers, the documents of the United States, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, also the declarations of the rights of man and citizen in French Revolution, but maybe we'll get there later. So it's important to at least know something about them and their time in history and what they were aiming for. And so I would say first off that the Age of Enlightenment was very preoccupied with the relationship between mathematics and philosophy, because the emphasis was becoming that logic and reason were the ways of explaining the universe and its parts. And that didn't just mean the natural worlds, which is what the scientific revolution really took and ran off with. It also meant human nature, right? So we can use logic and reason to understand human nature and why human beings have certain beliefs or certain drives. And so that also means the drive to govern and the drive to live in a civil society or live with other human beings, right? So Enlightenment thinkers took logic and reason and applied it also to how then should society be governed? How then should society operate? Should it be under a divine king? Should it be under an absolute monarch? Those were some of the questions that they were wrestling with. And so I would say a lot of the key figures, the most important key thinkers for us to really keep in our back pocket when we're thinking about the Enlightenment are for sure Francis Bacon, Thomas Hobbes, Voltaire, Hume, Rousseau, and then I would say 100% John Locke. I think John Locke is probably the most influential in terms of the founding fathers, and also
He is America.
he is America. He is 100% America. I mean, Thomas Jefferson takes words from the Second Treatise on Government and basically puts them in the Declaration of Independence. So I'd say of all the Enlightenment thinkers, because there were many, this was a time in which people were really participating in ideas, and right, we had societies like the philosophes, the salon, the French salon, where upper middle class men would come and they would discuss religion and government and science and all those different things. This whole period, that of all those figures, those are probably the most important.
Would you say
So
Isaac Newton?
no, Isaac Newton. No, Isaac Newton is definitely pre-Enlightenment scientific revolution. I would say again that it was Francis Bacon, Thomas Hobbes, Rene Descartes, Voltaire, Hume, Rousseau, and Locke. And then obviously when we get to the Americas, it'd be Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, with whom I have some quibbles, and Adams for sure. Most of the founding fathers, most of them. Not all of them were. Like George Washington wasn't very philosophically minded, but most of the founding fathers were. So, does that spark any response initially?
I think hitting on pain, especially now with the American Crisis essays,
Mm,
and the first where he opened, it feels like right now. His words feel like right now, and he said, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. And those were, he wrote those, that one was published in December, I think December 19th, perhaps, of 1776. So,
Yes, 76. Yep. The end of it. Yep.
that winter, and things were hard, and it wasn't looking good for the Patriots, and these essays, and he said, tyranny like hell isn't easily conquered. And it made me think of right now as well, especially our tyranny now has weaponized compassion and rage.
Mhm.
So it's really hard to conquer the tyranny that is being laid now, and it's being sold to us on TV, and marketed through social media. So it's really hard to see through that tyranny, but just pains the American crisis, and his continually to go back and write essays of encouragement to rally the troops is fitting for right now.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I definitely agree. And common sense, right, becomes this, this quintessentially American, almost like battle cry that a lot of us are trying to pick up again. But I think, Paine was obviously inspired, like a lot of the founding fathers, by these figures who were really quibbling, really struggling with the idea of what does it mean? What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be equal? What is the natural state of man? What does it look like? Is it brutish? Is it hellish? Like Hobbes believed, or is it idyllic and pastoral and free from corruption, like Rousseau believed? And if it's either of those, why then do people form governments? And is it because God ordains it and God chooses a man or a king and says, I'm going to make you Lord over all of my people? Or is it because people are trying to achieve certain political goals or certain political means? And that's what the Enlightenment figures are really trying to answer, right? They're trying to answer the idea of, for what reason do we come into these societies, and what's the purpose of those societies? What's the purpose of a leader, right? Hobbes really believed that that in natural state, man was just prone to constant state of war. And so because of that, there needed to be an absolute monarch, or at least a state, to come in and bring down the sword and keep people from that endless state of war. Whereas people like Rousseau really believed that there had to be some sort of social contract in which people came together and said, we know we're going to give up some of our freedom, we know we're going to give up some of our equality, but there's scarce resources in the world, and in order to live in cooperation with each other, we are going to form a government in which we give our consent to be governed, right? And they then protect us, or they at least protect the ideals, they protect the general will. Locke really saw that and said, well, really the whole purpose of any sort of state or any sort of government is to protect life, liberty, and property, right? That's the very essence. That's the very reason why we have any form of execution or form of governmental power, is to protect those inherent natural rights. And so we can see how those are inherently entrenched within the ideas of America, right? Mm-hmm. Jefferson says you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is just a spin on life, liberty, health, and property, which Locke says.
Let's start, if you don't mind, let's start from the from kind of the earlier philosophers and work our way down and kind of present, the world as, that they came into. we'll just get into them a little bit, and obviously it kind of gives people a frame of reference for who we're mentioning, who we're referring, what their contribution was, and yeah, my list is some of the most of the figures that you brought up. So we'll start with the Francis Bacon. He came into a world that, it was early 1600s, came into a world that really valued tradition as like that was your avenue to truth, was through like Aristotelian logic and deductive reasoning. And so, sorry, I read that. So what was his contribution? That's kind of where he was. What what is he known for?
Yeah, well, Bacon's one of the earlier figures, right? And his contribution is more about the primacy of knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge, right? He really helps with the development of the scientific method, because he believed that truth and knowledge needed to be separated from religion. That religion was still good and still had a lot of truth within it, but in order to find a lot of knowledge and truth of the world, you did have to go outside of religion. He is quoted with saying that knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is the key to betterment, is the key to a more fulfilling life, which we can totally see later on in the founding fathers and in the writings of early United States. One of the things that he really taught was that in the pursuit of knowledge, we're constantly fighting different idols. He calls them idols of the mind, idols of the tribe, right? Idols of the cave, the marketplace, the theater, all these different concepts and beliefs that we've either been raised with or are entrenched within our culture that we take for granted, and we haven't properly grappled with or actually examined. We've just accepted. So he's really one of the forerunners for saying that knowledge is the key to bettering yourself and to also finding your way in the world. I'm not going to say your truth, because that's been bastardized in so many different ways, but for finding the truth about the world around you. And again, I think you can really, really see that in the later writings of the early United States, for sure.
I get the that's one of the things I was interested in, is the four idols, and I get the idols of the tribe. It's being like skewed by thinking along things that I guess would give advantage to your group of people. The idols of the cave, which is the individual, so kind of being skewed, like seeking knowledge based, being skewed by your own perceptions.
Yep, right.
But could you describe to me idols of the marketplace and then idols of the theater?
So idols of the marketplace, right, is when we think of marketplace, we're thinking current day, right? Just like capitalistic market. Whereas he's thinking more of, I would say, the Greek agora, the meeting place where everybody comes together and they barter and they gossip and they discuss the events of the day, and they also exchange goods, right? They're looking to sell things. What is the purpose of the marketplace? The purpose of the marketplace is to meet other people and to also sell goods so that you're able to survive. That is something that is going to naturally influence your thoughts and your ideas, is that instinct to sell or to gain resources in order to survive. So that is going to prevent you from thinking clearly sometimes. And we can totally see that, just in today. I mean, you can see that all over human nature, of course. But when you're trying to survive, or you're trying to get rid of goods, or you're trying to gain goods, that may obscure your vision. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Did he talk about language also being like a distortion? Things not being in your vernacular.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right? Like culture being, for example, something that can hold you back from pursuing knowledge completely, right? Because you don't have all the access to a different culture's ideas and belief systems and ideas just because of language. Language itself is a limitation. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like I was something on the radio. They were talking about how no, it was a Joe Rogan podcast. There's a lady that translates works into, I believe, Arabic, because there's not a lot of like a lot of our culture is exposed and translated in the Middle East, for example. Like they wouldn't have a reference for 1984. That wouldn't be something that they would get. So then, not having that in your lexicon, not having that in your arsenal to maybe compare things to 1984, they don't have that ability to do. So, but yeah, that I mean that I think that something that he hit on 400 years ago applies to things today for sure. What about idols of the theater? What did he mean by that?
um from what I've read of him in terms of his beliefs on idols of the theater is that, right, the predominant entertainment or stories of the time period also can obscure our pursuit of knowledge and our vision, particularly because they often have agendas or histories behind them. You think of somebody like Shakespeare, who threaded throughout all of Shakespeare's plays are different cultural institutions, beliefs, ideas that can easily be taken for granted and then perpetuated through plays and through entertainment and through stories that, again, people take for granted. That's usually what I've understood him to mean by that.
Anybody else have anything on Francis Bacon? All right. Well, I
Lots
think
of learning to do. That's what I have. I have lots of learning to do. I've been cheating. I brought up a brief summary of the four idols and was listening along to Grace as she talked through. And the idols of the theater really caught my eye. This particular article cites that it's those which are due to sophistry and false learning, and it immediately channeled to me some of these purported debates that you see where it is a heavy emphasis on sophistry and high-minded language and very light on content, and seeing how effective those can be in swaying the audience, right? You know, I'm thinking of like the monk debate with Peterson and what was his name, Dyson, I believe. And
Oh
then there
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
then
Oh
there was the
God.
Politicon with Cenk Uygur and was it Shapiro or somebody else?
Yeah, I think it was
And yeah,
Shapiro.
the cheers and jeers of the crowd at kind of nothingisms that are said, and how easily swayed folks can be trying to score points. And it's yeah, if there's a common thread to anything, the more I've been reading about history lately, even if it was 30 years ago or 300 years ago, it seems like all of humanity is just every generation rediscovering what was a eureka moment to the generation beforehand. Like there's these common threads that you just see occur constantly, and it's like, man, if only we learned about stuff like this in school, right? Like what if we started off with these massive eureka moments in grade school instead of focusing on kind of trivial knowledge, right? You know, the I don't necessarily need to know what a cumulonimbus cloud is, but man, being armed against sophistry and seeking out real truth, man, how much further ahead of the curve I would have been picking that up 20 years ago, right?
Need to go through John Locke's School of Life, is it?
I guess so, yeah.
Isn't that one of the things that he was against, was like just learning about nonsense, that you should be
Yes,
learning about things that concern with
yes.
your day? But
He had a lot of opinions about learning.
so D- Descartes was around the same time
Hmm.
as Francis Bacon, kind of, obviously the same thing. The appeals to God, appeals to the church is kind of your underpinning of your pursuit of knowledge. Could you, describe Descartes' contribution and what he gave the Enlightenment?
Oh yeah, I mean Descartes is considered. Some historians consider him the father of modernity, because, right, his most famous phrase is "I think, therefore I am." He puts the primacy of, at least this is what a lot of historians argue, because there's debates about whether or not he intended any of this or even believed any of this, but the primacy of life being the human mind, um, and the human mind's ability to grasp reality and to grasp, um, the rest of the physical world. A lot of people argue that Descartes is what leads to kind of this dualism, this separation of the mind and the body, in which the body is living in the natural world and is interacting in the natural world, whereas the mind is using rationality and reason to make sense of the natural world around it. Um, Again, we're not entirely sure if that's what he meant or even what he believed, but this whole idea of your existence is because you think is a revolutionary idea. It's a revolutionary idea. You don't exist because God created you. You don't exist because you're physically present, or because somebody else tells you you exist. You exist because you use your human mind to solve problems and make judgments every single day about all variety of things. And again, that's a revolutionary idea, because that then means that you literally have the power within yourself to solve massive problems and tackle massive problems like government, economics, religion, science, all those things that, right, later on become our obsession. So
So he came into a time where people weren't sure if they were like actually existing or not.
yeah, no, I mean Plato and Aristotle had a lot of arguments obviously prior, about um the nature of the soul and the nature of the body. That gets picked up a lot during the Renaissance, and and then the Protestant Reformation. This whole idea of, do we exist? Is there such thing as existence? He's like, well, yeah, there is such thing as existence. The very fact that you're asking that question means that you exist.
I exist, or else I couldn't doubt my own existence.
Right,
It's
exactly.
basically his eureka moment that like took off from there. Interesting.
Right. So, I mean, some people have said that's the birth of the individual, which is a really radical idea. That is a moment where we see the culmination of ideas around humanity and the primacy of humanity against the primacy of God. And we see the Western world say that the individual is where life begins.
Interesting. So Rene Descartes, here's to you, the one of the fathers of individualism.
One of the fathers, for sure.
Yeah, and I feel that's humanity's big eureka moment. I mean, he came into this world in what 1596 and died in 1650. So
Yeah.
that was humanity. I mean, we were we were coming out of this very dark time, and kind of this idea like human rights, and like, oh wow, we're more than being subjects to the king or queen. We are more than being servants to this land. We can actually go out and explore and conquer and live and be free and be myself and connect with God. And that's it. So yeah, it was a revolutionary idea. Like, and we're still, I mean, it's 2020 and we've like almost got there, we're pushing.
We're
But
going backwards, man.
now there's a big movement to go backwards, because now the individual is regarded as the enemy. Not by me or you.
All right. Well, it's Immanuel Kant. He
Mm.
was not religious, but felt like there was some value in religion, like that there was a. He was kind of afraid of the movement towards secularism, that people kind of need to have some kind of defined morality. What all was his contributions to the Enlightenment?
Well, Kant is a little later in relation to these earlier guys. And you're correct. He's definitely wary of some of the ideas of the Enlightenment. He's a little wary of secularism. Um, right. One of his major works was Critique of Pure Reason. Right. There has to be some sort of compromise between the religious impulse and reason. Maybe they can work in cooperation with each other to form a moral precepts or moral belief systems. Um, he's part of a school too of thought that, I mean, the German morality, German philosophy is heavily concerned more with concepts of morality and where those come from rather than just pure government. I'd say like the British are, or the French. British and French were a little more concerned with the relationship between humanity and government, whereas the Germans are a little more concerned with the very issue of morality and its impact on human beings and their beliefs and forming those belief systems. I mean, Nietzsche takes this later on and destroys it. He had a lot of choice things to say about Kant. But yeah, Kant was really looking. I am not as much of an expert in Kant as some of the other thinkers, but Kant was very much preoccupied with the problem of trying to somehow compromise religion with reason and find a middle ground in some way of marrying the two.
So he like he trying to establish morality based on reason.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that he did that I think underlines one of the fundamental differences between I hate to say left and right, but can't think of any better phrasing, is being rights focused to
Yeah.
being like responsibility focused.
Yep.
It was very important to have a sense of duty and be focused on duty and not just a complete free for all. He didn't see freedom just being, oh, nobody cares, I can do whatever it is I please, but having a sense of duty to yourself and to your fellow man and to society, something that he felt was important.
Yeah, he definitely within the whole realm of ethics, he's definitely somebody who, right, we say his form of ethics is more concerned with responsibilities, right? Ethics is based off of responsibility, which is important, and we can see later on becomes a really integral aspect of, well, how then are people supposed to operate in a society, and how on earth could a democratic or a republican form of society work? Well, if people follow morality based off of their responsibilities to each other and themselves, maybe there'll be some sort of society that functions.
Is there anybody that you wanted to talk about in between Kant and the two earlier guys?
Specific, I think
I was going to go with basically the list that I had on the outline. I was going to go Locke, which is a lot, and then
I love Locke.
Montesquieu and Rousseau and Voltaire. Is there anybody that that you wanted to include before we go down that line? Oh, and Adam Smith, I have him as well.
Oh yeah. Smith is a big part. I mean, I think Hobbes is incredibly important and someone you can't leave out because of his whole I mean, Leviathan is such a integral piece of work that everybody should read. Um, and his understanding of human nature and government is so interesting, especially considering where we are today as a society. Um, because a lot of the criticisms that people had of his social contract theory have kind of come to fruition, right? The very idea that there needs to be this all-powerful state that keeps people from a continual state of war. That what ends up happening is that you create this force that has the power to keep people in check, but it eventually itself becomes that tyrannical force. Um,
Basically, one of the fundamental differences between him and John Locke is
yes.
that he felt that in the absence of a state, the absence of a ruler, society would delve into chaos.
Yep.
Whereas Locke thinks, when there's no ruler, there's no king, there's no government, for the most part, it'll be a peaceful existence. Just kind of a completely different view on
Yep.
anarchy, it seems.
For sure. I mean, I would argue that John Locke is really his form of government, his whole moral and political philosophy is probably most closely aligned with the concept of minarchism. You should have just the very minimum amount of government to protect people's lives and their property, and that's really the only purpose of it. There's no other reason for it. Therefore, you don't need the ginormous federal government or even democratic state that most Western countries have. Whereas Hobbes is definitely right. I mean, he believes in a state that's powerful enough to keep everybody in check, not just protect your property or your life, for sure.
So it seems like there's like there is a divergence in the Enlightenment where you have kind of these top-down approaches where you do need a ruler, you do need to impose some kind of morality from the top and control society, and then there's this like a free, autonomous, bottom-up approach that like a John Locke or Montesquieu have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's part of the part I found interesting because I always thought of the Enlightenment as kind of being one approach or one school of thought, but really the Enlightenment seems to be the father of Karl Marx as well as the
Yep.
father of America.
Yep.
It's also the father of the French Revolution,
Yep.
which kind of just taper off into the view of how a society should operate. So that's one thing I found interesting because I always thought of it just being one kind of this person contributed this person contributed this, and it culminated into one thing. But really, it did break off into other philosophies of Western civilization.
Yeah.
Which
No. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
it is funny because the rejection of the Enlightenment is on the basis of it being white European men. It just happens to be that they prefer other white European men of, Karl Marx, for example.
Right.
I digress. So the next one on my list is a big one. Is John Locke.
If you don't mind, Jack, I'd like to just sort of tag on to that a bit and maybe get some opinions from the group.
Please.
So my very broad stroke limited understanding of the Enlightenment, I think you touched on something that kind of summarizes my overall perception of that. Where prior to that, at least in Europe, we had variations in ancient Rome and Greece and other stuff like that. But basically, prior to the Enlightenment, kind of coming out of that medieval type period, it was a very top down centralized power. The individual held no significance. And so to me, it's not surprising that you had that divergence among the thinkers,
Mm-hmm.
the Enlightenment era thinkers, because that was sort of that divide point. Like that's where the bifurcation originates, where we switched from being a collection of peasantry divided from the aristocracy to the individual person, regardless of their station, has merits, right? The individual pursuit for truth and meaning, and it's not necessarily just handed down from whatever religious or political or insert command structure around which you orient your society here, right? And so I think again, my layman, very broad stroke interpretation of it is the Enlightenment is that rebellion against that concept, and it is a move towards. Um, we still have these latent centralized power structures, but individual people are a source of power and meaning in and of themselves. And maybe that's an incorrect interpretation or a gross overgeneralization, but that's I guess when I try to encapsulate the feeling of the Enlightenment, that's sort of where my mind wanders to. So this is where Grace or Jason can be like, yeah, no, actually, that's
Well,
wildly incorrect.
I'm sitting here nodding. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like we kind of said, it's humankind emerging from that dark period, and like, hey, there's more to this life than what's being said. And kind of, fast forward, we are in that situation now where those ideas are under attack. And I never thought I would live in a world that reason and logic and that would be something that society would be attacking.
Yeah, I mean it's a destructive tear down philosophy that does not like the creation of the Enlightenment, that does not like liberalism, that does not like capitalism, that does not like America. And critical theory is purely a tear down philosophy. It's not something that you can build anything upon, and it's seek and destroy of the current system in favor of breaking it down and then building it up in your own image. Like, you can't go from America, what it is today, or what it was 2019 anyway, to utopia, to the ideologue utopia. You need to break it down first, and that's in
Well, and
today's terms, it seems to be where we're at.
I haven't even seen the rebuilding plans, the blueprints for what utopia. I
Gotta
don't
tear
know
it down
if anybody's
first.
working on that yet. I think everybody's just working on the destroying.
See,
All
the
right.
thing is, once you tear it down, then it becomes really obvious what you need to do next. We just gotta knock down these walls, and then the blueprints will come together.
Right.
Yeah.
Always the first step whenever I want to build something is go to an existing structure and just tear it down.
I will note before we get into John Locke, um, none of this is in what should be an Enlightenment education. So I don't. When I was paying attention in K through 12, I don't remember the getting into much of the Enlightenment and the philosophers behind it and the actual ideas and what things were based upon. Unless I was sleeping those days, I don't remember really getting that deep into what should seem obvious. If you're describing America, you should just go to the Enlightenment and say, all right, this idea came from this. This is why this is in place. This is why they thought that. Um, it seems to be a really important part of an Enlightenment education that we're not getting. But
I can attest that in my K through 12 plus bachelor's, I was exposed to exactly zero of all of this information.
That is, yeah. I mean,
I remember being excited about Locke. I remember reading about Locke and getting excited, like, oh yeah, this is good stuff. So I do remember some Locke that influence.
must be that Texas education down there, then.
Yeah, back when we were still doing things decent.
I mean, it's a shame. It's definitely a shame because, I think a lot of people, the way they teach history, it sucks. So that's a big part of the problem. And B, I think a lot of people are intimidated by philosophy and don't even then just try to touch it. They're like, this is too much. These ideas are all right. Like, these don't even matter. This isn't real life. The problem is that people don't understand how much philosophy has impacted life, everyday life, how you think of yourself, how you operate in your job and your relationships. So we shouldn't be intimidated by philosophy. I mean, everybody should be participating in philosophy. it's not just for the intellectuals or for the academics. Frankly, they kind of suck at it at the moment. So, and have sucked at it for a while. Um, so we can't be intimidated by it, but we've been taught to be intimidated by it. That it's for the elite philosophers and intellectuals who can understand, and that's just not true.
What's interesting too, to your point, when you break down why they thought what they thought, the reason behind it, the logic behind it, it's much simpler to grasp than here's Einstein and how he discovered,
Right.
relativity. I have no fucking clue when I hear something like that. Clueless. I read John Locke. Okay, makes total sense. I understand how he got from A to B to C to D to E. So yeah, to your point, it's not nearly as intimidating as some other fields.
God,
But let's
I
go
think
ahead.
that's. I want to throw something in there too. I think that's definitely a point of frustration that I have. Going through school, I had the opportunity at a couple points to take a philosophy class, and everything that I could tell of it was this sort of nebulous, sort of the teacher pontificates and everybody just sort of talks about their feelings and this blah type of thing. And I always thought, oh, that's something for people who have the luxury of not striving desperately to gain marketable skills, right? Like that's a fun throwaway course for people whose parents have their backs, right? And so I never pursued any of it. And it wasn't until I started sort of stumbling across some of this stuff just in my hobby reading and whatnot, that it was like this tremendous eureka moment that really philosophy is sort of teaching you various modes of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it just the little bit that I've delved into it in sort of independent study, it was incredible. There's all these concepts and things that I had sort of like intuited through personal experience or empirical assessment, and I had like these vague notions of disparate concepts, and I could tell that there was an interconnection. Like you could sense it, but you couldn't yet quantify it at a conscious level. And then you catch a fairly cursory snippet of whatever, either psychological or philosophical writings about some stuff, and it's just like, oh, like of course that's what it is. Oh my gosh, how did I not see that, right? And I don't know, I guess maybe this is a very classical bent towards education, but I'm like, why is this not the bedrock for our educational system? Like your early years are formed around fundamentals, always with an undercurrent of philosophy to teach people how to think. I feel like so much of our society, nobody thinks anymore. They consume and they react and they feel, but there's not a deliberate conscious effort to think. And that's why we have people who feel incredibly strongly and offer appallingly terrible solutions to problems that they feel very deeply about, because they haven't thought it out. They've just realized there's a problem, and the absolute simplest possible band-aid fix is to do X, right?
Make it free.
Yeah, people are homeless. Why don't we just give them houses? Sure,
Genius.
sure.
I mean, duh.
Yeah. Why didn't anyone else think of that? Man.
Crime is bad. Let's get rid of the police.
Yeah. We have people who feel people keep doing this bad thing. I know. We'll just pass a law and done. That's it. That shuts it down. You put your little gun-free zone sign up on the corner of the front door, and all of a sudden nobody ever gets shot there ever again.
We definitely do not teach how to think. We teach what to think, and it's just you get dope, repetitive, especially history. It's just been diminished to just dates and repetitive. Just know that this happened, then this happened, and you don't learn any of the lessons of history. You don't learn the philosophy behind something, why something came to be, and it's really unfortunate. Partly, makes you wonder how much of it is on purpose that it's like that. The other part is just the fact that it's the government, and of course that's how it's going to be when the government's in charge of our educations. So
if you so I like to look into game theory, right? And so I look a lot at incentives and response and things like guiding behavior through incentives and how people react.
Mm-hmm.
And if you abstract our current educational model out, it essentially browbeats thinking out of people,
Mm-hmm.
and trains them with a reward structure that is singularly focused upon how well can you regurgitate what an authority figure has told you to believe? Like, that's the core tenet of our educational system. It's like, well, no,
Pumping out office drones.
yeah, and it's like, well, no wonder people, Pizzagate or QAnon or Russiagate or insert topic here. No wonder that shit takes off like wildfire, right? You get your person on the internet who you trust as a figure of truth, and they throw out some wild allegation, and you're okay. Yeah, I've been trained for 17 years that I need to internalize that, remember it, and then when called upon, spit out the gist of it, or select it on the multiple choice test. It's like, well, no wonder these things take on like wildfire, right? There's nobody. And if I can throw out a defensive critical theory, the original purpose, my understanding, is precisely to counteract that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The core thesis, my very basic understanding, is to not just accept things as rote, but to critique them, to question them, to dig at what is at the core behind this, what is the motivation behind this, which I think is a very important and powerful tool that people maybe it's ironic, people mistook its power as having a singular meaning and just ran wild with it, and now they're trying to use that to dismantle other structures of power and gain power for themselves. But
well, I mean, look, it's unfortunately the period of history we're in now, like none of this is new, right? I mean, these concepts and these beliefs that we're talking about, which are so fascinating and inspiring, and led to the founding of the United States and the flourishing of so many societies around the world. It also led to the French Revolution eventually, which started off really good and then took a serious nosedive very quickly, right? I mean, the United States is unfortunately unique. It's not par for the course like most other revolutions, which usually end into terrible, bloody wars or in some cases actual genocides if you're in Russia.
Exchanging one set of rulers for another, basically.
So I mean, it's so often. I mean, we talked about earlier, right? We talked about there's people who obviously are nefarious and have agendas and are purposely trying to control and manipulate people. And then there's people who are really dumb and really stupid. And then I think there's a third category of people who really just want to do the right thing and have good intentions. And
they're just not paying attention.
And so they're told, well, this is what's good. This is what's right. And they're like, okay. Yeah. I mean, all right, well, yeah, then we're going to do this. I'm not racist. I'm not bigoted. So yeah, of course I'm going to chant this slogan, or I'm going to sign this petition, or agree with this celebrity's Instagram and post a black blob for my picture because I want to be a good person. I want to do the right thing. So I think that's another part of the puzzle.
Much to I'll get this right. Fox's point about critical theory. You might be right. It sounds interesting. Critical theory, which is kind of what I feel like you get in college, seems to be paired really well with a factory education. It seems to be like if I was a critical theorist, the kind of education that I would want K through 12 to have would be the kind that's already in existence. A very repetitive factory. This person's a hero. This person's whatever. Here you go. And then tee them up for critical theory, which appears to reveal behind the curtain, this is what America truly is. You've been lied to by your parents, and you've been lied to by, your teachers, and this is the society. And so you get these people that are like, oh, discovery, I'm woke, even though it's not a word.
Right.
And now they come out and they see the oppression, they see the lies, they see it in Thanksgiving and Columbus, that we're celebrating, and, they know they've been exposed to the world. And unfortunately, they don't receive an enlightenment education. It's like almost, it's like our opponents are selected for us, kind of, how I always feel about the Republican Party of like, okay, none of these people represent what they're supposed to represent in constitutional conservatives. I always say it looks like the Washington Generals against the Globetrotters, that we bet on them, but they're not supposed to win. They're part of the program. They're part of
Right.
they're the opponent. And
Right.
it almost seems like school is teed up in a similar fashion. This is set them up with this, make them stupid, don't teach them how to think, just give them these little dates and times or whatever, and then expose them to critical theory and make them feel like they're the smartest people in the world. So anyway, that's my
And
take.
not only that, but also teeing it up to catch people when they're at that peak of the Dunning-Kruger chart where they're
Mhm.
just beginning to experience autonomy and adulthood,
Yep.
and they believe they've got it all figured out because they haven't encountered enough to know otherwise, and you're at that maximum rebellion, maximum unearned confidence, maximum youthful vigor, and then you flip the switch and you turn them out the door, right? Like how what an optimal configuration for creating radicalized army of people, right?
It's really a perfect model. You got to give it to them. Honestly, I wish we could do the same thing.
When was the Department of Education established again?
Under like 80, 81, something like that.
Federal level or
Federal level, yeah.
You're like, yeah. Think of the that's not a coincidence.
No, that's right when those 60s rebels were getting old enough to make some decisions.
after they went from being the rambunctious college kids rebelling to having worked their way to middle/upper management of various power structures.
Yeah, they had infiltrated academia. They were the
Yeah.
professors and the deans and the people making the decisions in academia.
On that subject, Jack and I have a similar story where we kind of started off a little bit radicalized towards that direction, and then sort of slowly, like the gaps started to come through. And what you touched on was one for me. I recall learning about the Weather Underground and sort of their activities, and then later finding that like some of the core members were like tenured professors at major universities. And I recall even at that time when I was very much like Rage Against the Machine, F the system, all that, thinking,
God,
wait a minute. So these people that did all this stuff, and it's publicly known and acknowledged, and they're just like university professors, and that's okay? Like, wait
That's
a
the same thing with Antifa today.
yeah.
Anytime that there's a bus, it's like, oh, 8 of these people are elementary school teachers or whatever. It's
Yeah.
massive link between education and neo-Marxism.
Well, and the weird double standard that it's somehow okay. Right? Like, oh yeah, these people, did these low-level terrorism type things, but it's cool. They run the philosophy department at blah 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 state university now or something like that. And it's like, really? That doesn't seem right.
Yeah. I went down that rabbit hole again this morning, as a matter of fact, with the Weatherman. I'm like, I need to go reread Prairie Fire, see how that is influencing this movement. Like that, like the Weathermen were like this small little microcosm of what is happening right now all over the country. So
Right? I think it was the model, right?
yeah. And I think I forget the lady's name, but there's somebody that was in the Weatherman Underground, and she, I do believe, is on the board of BLM. I wish I knew the name so I could throw it out there, but it's something I came across this morning. That makes sense.
Let's call this a teaser for our next project, which is the Long March Through the Institutions, which I'm really excited about. But let's reel it back in, and we'll get to John Locke.
Our boy John Locke.
That's our transition into John Locke, who did want an actual Enlightenment education for people. So we've established
he's trying to lock us down, TJ. Is that what you're trying to say right now? You're trying to lock this conversation down?
Yep, exactly. I'm trying to moderate. And John Locke, we've established is America. This is one of the key figures among several different areas of philosophy and education and morality and religion. And so John Locke, who is he? What did he contribute? Why is he America?
Oh man, John Locke. Well, John Locke was he is considered by many to be the father of liberalism, right? And when we say liberalism, we mean it in the true sense of the word. A, a belief system, a political philosophy based off of the concept of freedom and liberty being the most important pursuits. And, you know, John Locke was an English philosopher. He was a little after he was after Descartes, he was after Bacon, but he was a precursor to the founding fathers by about 100 years. And he really was born in a time, this is a time in British history where the religious wars and the revolutions that were taking place were destroying England, and throwing them completely over for a loop. So he's born into a time of a lot of religious and political upheaval, right? So being forced to ask the questions of what is the free nature of man look like? What does a free state look like in which human beings are free to pursue whatever they want? Is that going to look terrible? Is that going to look great? Is it going to look somewhere in the middle? And what's the answer to this upheaval that we're in the midst of? His answer really was that, life, liberty, and property were the fundamental key aspects of man. And those were his natural rights. Locke was for sure a natural law philosopher, a natural rights philosopher, right? So meaning that our rights as human beings they come from God. We're born with them. They're innate rights that we have that nobody can take from us. And that really the only purpose of government, which he envisioned often as like a set of impartial judges, right? A set of people who were removed from society and would be able to come in and adjudicate conflicts between people or between groups and say, okay, you wronged this person, so you owe them X, or you wronged this person, so you owe them Y. That was what he kind of saw as a government, was really these like impartial judges. That was his vision, was that man had natural rights to life, liberty, and property. And property was, he had a lot of definitions for property. He was a lot more liberal with property than I would say maybe even we are. There's actually a lot of libertarian debate on that today. But you had your rights to those three things, and that then the only purpose of the government was to protect those things from, obviously, people or groups that wanted to steal those things. We can really see that in then the founding American documents, which again say, right, we are setting up this government in order to protect this land that we've cultivated, these trades that we've established, right, from which we earn money, and we've created this entire economic system. We are setting up a government to protect us and to protect this trade and this economy that we've created on our own, apart from the British government. And we are saying that we are going to have one separate from them, and we are going to essentially instill a government that's going to protect us from the British or any other government coming in and thus stealing what we've built.
So basically, he establishes that we have natural rights: life, liberty, property. These rights are not given to you by government; they're given to you by God and nature. And the only purpose of government is to secure and protect those rights. So basically, we'll give a little bit of our freedom away just for the protection of our rights, because obviously, if you kill me or I kill you, then what prevents that? And so you do need some form of a state, some form of a collective that at the very least protects my house from getting destroyed, robbed, without me having to sit here at home all day with a gun and and protect it. And so he's kind of a father of limited government and establishing what the role is of government. Because, like you said, the debate between him and Hobbes thinks that in a land of anarchy, thing will just devolve into chaos, and he believes that if in anarchy, it'll be relatively peaceful, and understands that you just need a very limited government, and knows about how it can become tyrannical. He also leads to the separation of church and state, which I was fascinated by, just how simplistic this is. So this, he at the time, the idea is that the government should control religion. The state should tell you this is the religion that we're going to have. And his his essay Toleration advocated for toleration on 3 basic points. This is how we get separation of church and state. So he states that earthly judges cannot evaluate the truth claims of competing religious standpoints. Makes sense. We can't tell if I can't prove that hell doesn't exist or heaven doesn't exist, or God. I don't know about anything in the afterlife. So when you have this afterlife and unworldly process, I can't prove it. And so, that's valid. Enforcing a single true religion would not work because you cannot be compelled into belief through violence.
Right.
That's completely valid reasoning. I completely understand that. And then coercing religious uniformity leads to far more social disorder than allowing diversity.
Yep.
So on 3 simple points, that the reasoning is perfect, and that's kind of the forerunner to separation of church and state.
Yep.
Which it seems separation of church and state seems to be one of those things that we oversimplify and misconstrue, in the sense that we think that the government should have no influence of religion whatsoever, when the purpose of separation of church and state is that the state doesn't have control over what religion you have. It doesn't say that people within power or government institutions can have an influence by religion and God. I mean, I'm sure they understand how much of the Bible leads to the Constitution, for example, the morality that's in it. It's one of the reasons why you have courthouses that might have the 10 Commandments, is because that's where a lot of our law stems from. And so we just hear it in our head, separation of church and state, and then the 2 can't merge. No, that's a statement saying that the state can't tell you what religion you can follow and say, no, you can't be Muslim, you must be Catholic, or
Right.
whatever. And that's where that all comes from.
Yeah, that's a really hard. You have to understand that separation of church and state is coming out of the context of the Protestant and Catholic religious wars, right? Which again, Locke is a product of, is what led to the social disorder, right? Because essentially, one queen is Catholic, the next queen is Protestant, right? So you're screwed if the monarch is a different denomination than you are. And that means all of a sudden you can't practice the way you want to practice. You're in danger of your life. So it's coming out of a very specific context, but it is still a Christian context. And he is taking it for a given that most people are going to be religious and still participate in religious activity. 100%. We can't take that for granted. One of the things that we've seen recently, I'd say in really the past, maybe 20, 30 years, is this weird, especially around the Republican Party, it's this weird, like, well, people's religious attitudes shouldn't affect their political beliefs. And it's like, well, no, that's been happening like literally forever. And in fact, I mean, Catholics were a big part of some of the social justice, the early social justice movement. So it's this whole concept that they can be separated, like in your mind, like you can bifurcate them and you can think politically and religiously. That's insane, right? And to your point, it's really more about the state can't come down and tell you what to believe or force you to practice a certain way, and it can't mandate certain dictates.
Yeah, because he acknowledges that religion's a choice; it's
Yep.
voluntary, and then the state is coercion; it's force,
Right.
and so it's a limitation on force, not on a voluntary practice. It's a
Exactly.
one-way street, basically.
Exactly. Yep.
Well,
As you
Um,
were reading those, it made me think about the current now and the religious aspect of the woke movement and how important the separation of church, the new church, and state is. Each one of those three bullets that you read really resonated from that lens as well, of the need for us to be able to push back as things are being coerced on us.
yeah.
Well, I feel like that was also a counterpoint to, and I always get it mixed up. What then is it, Anglican or Episcopal? The state church associated with England, right?
The Church of England was Anglican.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So yeah, it's sort of a counterpoint to that, right? Where you have your monarch decrees the state religion, and then all within the kingdom are forced to assume that, and it was sort of a protection of religious liberty from that sort of intrusion, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny because it was a, secularism, at least I would say separation of church and state was kind of a solving a problem, at least in the Western world, that had begun more than 1,000 years back, really like 1,300 years back. And they finally had come to the conclusion, maybe we should just, you know what? Maybe we should stop trying to tell people how to practice their religion. Let's just go back to, let's go back to a model of you do you and you believe what you want. And in some ways, ironically, and there's debates about whether or not this was truly an influence on the founding fathers or not, and the Enlightenment thinkers. The Romans, while certainly religious and they had a state religion, Rome had a very robust state religion. When they conquered new areas, they were very adamant. They were like, you can practice what you want. As long as you pay your dues to the emperor, as long as you are reverent to him and to the empire, you can do whatever you want. You can worship whoever you want. We are not going to tell you how to do that. Ironically, in some ways, separation of church and state is a more modern twist on that Roman concept, I would argue.
And John Locke also gave us, so he gives us separation of church and state, establishes the purpose of government, limited government, essentially negative rights versus positive rights.
Yes.
Because now it's freedom from the government,
Right.
from intrusions and theft and force and whatnot, as opposed to the positive rights of a right to this, a right to that. But he also gives us the Second Amendment in a way, because he classifies the relationship with government as still voluntary, meaning it's a servant of the people and it is there to provide some basic necessities, and states that when a ruler becomes tyrannical, then the relationship is no longer consensual, it's no longer voluntary, and citizens are well within their right to overthrow with force that tyrant. And that is the basis for the Second Amendment. There's no debate on why they put it in there. It stems from John Locke. It is pure. It's not there for hunting. It's not there to protect your house from a burglar. It is purely there to overthrow a tyrannical government, which he acknowledges must kind of sort of happen from time to time. And we've been long since under a tyrannical rule, but that's one of his many contributions to today. I wanted to touch on property. Speaking about today, the importance of declaring, the importance of life, liberty, property. We seem to live in a time that now says, "Oh, it's just property." They have insurance when it comes to the riots and burning people's buildings and businesses and things they worked for their entire life for. And it is sickening, this kind of view that property isn't as important as, like, at least they're not killing somebody. It's property, because in a weird way, destroying someone's property isn't that far off from enslavement. It's just it occurs afterwards. You didn't know that you were enslaved because if you own a car, for example, and it costs you 10 grand, and you've been paying, for that car this entire time, you saved up for it. Each one of those dollars represents time that you spent working. You worked for this car, and so the destruction of that car is enslaving you for the amount of hours that you had to work to save up for it. That applies to your house, any kind of property you have. So I value property needs to be right up there, just as valuable as anything else, because it's essentially just post enslavement that you just didn't know that you were enslaved the entire time.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's something that I think it's very easy for us to forget because we live in a time. I mean, we live in a very a knowledge economy, right? Most of us are knowledge workers. Less and less of us are laborers. Very few of us are farmers who own land that we work, right? He's writing out of a period in which the land that you owned and that you worked off of, that was not just how you fed your family. That was probably also how you bartered and got other goods from other people, right? It was the basis of your home economy. The word economy comes from economia, and there's a reason for that. The house, your home, is where really the beginning of an economy begins. And if you can't protect that, right, you will starve. You will not be able to take care of your family, meaning your wife, your children, probably your extended family as well, right? Because again, he's writing out of a period in which you weren't just responsible for yourself. It's so easy for us to be disconnected from that because so many of us rent, or maybe we bought a house but we're like, like I paid 10% down and then I owe the bank the rest of it essentially, and I'll be paying it off for the next 20, 30 years. We don't have that physical connection to a land that we sweat and we labored over, and that we had to protect, not just from people, but from nature, right? We had to protect from the weather. We had to protect from the seasons. We had to protect from other animals. One of the things that I love to point out to people all the time, because it's so important for us to understand, because we're not pastoral anymore. The very idea of like the werewolf in Western culture as this monster developed especially after these giant werewolf scares in Germany and France in the late Middle Ages, in which people's entire flocks were just being destroyed. And if you lost your entire sheep flock, you lost everything. If a pack of wolves came in and ate your entire flock, you're dead. You're going to starve, and your whole family's going to starve. So the wolf was this frightening monster that was going to take away everything from you, and thus became this horrible figure of death and loss, right? The werewolf. And again, we don't get that because we don't understand the primacy of your property and how much you need it to live and feed your family. So of course, yeah, property has to be up there with life, because it's your life's work. It's not just this piece of land or this house or, oh, my computer or my car. Property is your life's work, the accumulation of what you've done with your life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's important to say. I guess one final thing I wanted to touch on with Locke was getting into the debate of Hobbes and Locke. It just made me think of a story of what happens when there's no government. Does society devolve into chaos, or does it devolve into peace? And I certainly think that there's there's pro-government propaganda. There seems to be a telling of history that kind of supports the idea that society can't be self-sustaining, that we can't exist in anarchy. We do need rulers. We do need a large state. I think one example that shows that propaganda, and then the example of what actually takes place, is the stories of the Wild Wild West, of being this chaotic
Lol.
murdering, highway robbery, or train robberies and bank robberies all the time. And what's surprising with the Wild Wild West is nothing like that. It is one of the most peaceful, just pleasant times in human history. Um, they estimate that between 1859 to 1900, throughout the entire frontier, there was less than a dozen bank robberies that took place. Murder rates were absolutely nothing. It was just a massive success story of independent societies living free from the government. They were off the rolls. They were not, even on the radar of the federal government. And it was numerous situations of just they're successful, and it just becomes the story of no, it was this chaos and murder and whatever, and then that's just okay. That's the Wild Wild West, and it's almost like this anti-anarchy libertarian propaganda
Right.
that takes place and kind of shapes our reality in a way. Anyway.
Product of Hollywood for sure. I mean, you read Louis L'Amour and you get a much different picture of the West than if you're watching old movies, with Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly. Um, it's kind of a different. Yeah, I mean, we forget that you're totally right, and we forget, that we call it the Wild West, right? And we associate wild as being bad. But hey, if we're going back to this question of, Rousseau and Hobbes and Locke, is wild inherently bad or is it inherently good? Is it actually inherently a state in which men are all free and equal, as Rousseau argued, right? Is it actually a state in which people have the freedom to pursue whatever they want?
So John Locke kind of gives us the, separation of church and state, limited government, Second Amendment, amongst many other things, education. He gives us the why and what a government is for. And then I feel like Montesquieu gives us the how. How do you construct that government? Because it seems like when they create the founding documents, they're stealing it from Montesquieu. And could
Why
you
do
go
you
into
say that?
The separation of the separation of powers, and so you have the legislative, the three branches of government, that you create law over here, and somebody else enforces it, and then somebody else judges on it. The idea of gridlock basically being
A
a
good thing.
design of the system. It's not something you complain about. It's like, listen, people are tyrannical and terrible. We don't want them to be effective. We don't want them to create law and just change things immediately. The whole point is the understanding that freedom is temporary. So we're just going to put as many roadblocks as possible and then hope that it lasts as long as possible. And it did. We're one of the younger countries and we have the oldest constitution. And it's taken this long to destroy it, basically. The idea of the republic versus a democracy comes from Montesquieu. Checks and balances. The understanding that power is corruptible. Everybody is corrupted. And so you want to limit the power of a single entity and try to balance people's powers amongst themselves. And so government's already an imperfect beast. And so just designing it to be as least horrible as possible seemed to be the contribution of Montesquieu anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. Right, because the whole idea of designing a system that makes it difficult to pass legislation or to uniformly pass down decrees or treatises, right, is important, because one of the things we always complain about is, oh man, like, why can't just one person be in charge and make all the rules? Well, I mean, yeah, that's called a monarchy.
Right.
And listen, that is very effective. And in fact, the Romans themselves implemented that for times of crisis, right? When the city was being invaded, you established a dictator who, for a very short period of time, took over and said, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to fight the enemy. Problem is when that person decided, I like this job forever. I'm going to keep this. His name is Caesar. We got the Roman Empire.
The story of Cincinnatus, right?
Yeah, right. That's exactly it. Is the whole idea of a monarchy is that you can pass down legislation very quickly, right? You can enforce it very quickly. And how do you oppose that? You make it as difficult as humanly possible, right? So that if you do pass down legislation, it's gone through this huge, long process of everybody arguing about it, everybody contemplating it, reading it, and then coming to the point of saying, okay, this is probably worth our time. So I think that's a great point. I think that that's a good differentiator between the founding, between the Enlightenment thinkers, the who and the what and the how, for sure.
And the idea of the republic versus the democracy.
Oh Lord, this is, yeah. I mean, you look like you want to say something, Jason.
I was going through some things earlier and I forget where that was. I was just like, this is going to be a big thing.
Yeah, I think we can definitely safely say that the founding fathers were deathly afraid of pure democracy, because to Montesquieu,
Who was it that was, one of them was favoring, I think, was it Rousseau? I don't know.
the good Rousseau definitely believed in the will of the people.
Yeah, submission to the general will.
He
was more of a proponent of a democracy than
he was a little more of a proponent of democracy, and his
Rather
opponent,
than elected officials.
yeah, his opponent said that that would lead to a tyranny of the majority.
Right. Reading about Rousseau, I think that I feel the postmodernists may have liked some of Rousseau. I remember what you said earlier about how some of these people were kind of the undoing. I see Rousseau as one of those figures.
Pre-socialist, basically.
Yes, yeah.
The idea of the collective and the social, his version of the social contract, that there's a collective good in a sense. Like he's kind of the father of all that, and the father of the French Revolution in a way.
He's totally the father of the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And again, right, which is an example of the tyranny of the majority, which the founding fathers were deathly afraid of.
Right.
The whole idea was,
it's pretty obvious. I mean,
yeah, we're living it.
It's the majority having tyranny and control over the minority. Hey, congratulations, we all voted for slavery. Oh, that's great.
Right.
We all voted to destroy your house or your property or something like that. Yeah, this basic idea that no, you don't just get a vote and then that's the general will of the populace, or else people will vote for things. They'll vote to steal your property. They'll vote for higher taxes against you and benefiting themselves. It's an obvious reason why democracy fails and why republic, a limitation on what the people can do and what the government can do is so important. Just putting limitations on government and establishing your freedoms.
Just a quick show of hands. Who deserves a big chunk of Jeff Bezos' fortune? Everybody? Because if we all vote in, there's only one of him, so I think we got this.
Yeah.
Love it.
I mean, the mob mentality, again, it's just so funny because we're seeing it now, obviously in a different way. I mean, I would say Twitter is definitely the embodiment of like the modern mob mentality. But again, the mob mentality is something that people have been afraid of forever. But that, the Enlightenment thinkers were grappling with, because they're thinking to themselves, social contract. We'll have the consent to be governed, and we'll create a state in which there's a mutual relationship between us and those over us. Oh, but what happens if we all turn on them? What then? Is it peaceful? Is it violent? It's usually violent. History tells us it's usually violent. And so this is something that like James Madison, for instance, was very concerned about. He was very worried about, and this was part of the reason why he really tried to write into the founding documents protections of minorities and protections of individuals against the majority.
No smaller minority than the individual.
No smaller minority. Yeah. And it's like, we think today that it was just all white, oh, it's just all white people. But they had minorities then too. They were just different. Religious denominations were minorities. Catholics were considered minorities for a very long time. Certain classes were considered minorities, right? Certain white people were minorities. It's not like they all saw themselves as white people. We're all white landowning people. No, majority of the people didn't own land, and a lot of the people came from completely disparate parts of Western Europe that barely even had a common language. So yeah, they didn't see themselves as this monolith. They had the concept of minorities just as much as we do today.
I think to touch on like the idea of landowners should vote, I'm almost a proponent of that. I kind of am a proponent of that. It sounds evil depending on what your perception, where your angle is coming from. So if you have a top-down approach, meaning you think that society is controlled by the will of the people and we're going to determine our ruler and they're going to make decisions that better us, then yeah, you value the vote more than anything else. That is your key to society. But when you desire to live in a free society where government is only doing a few things, it only does this, protecting my rights. And so what we're voting them for is on the basis of their ability to just do those things and spend the money that they steal from us, basically. And so in my worldview, it shouldn't be everybody votes. It should be proper. It should be positive taxpayers, basically. If you pay in, you get a say. And that's kind of what the land ownership was, because there wasn't income tax. There wasn't any other kind of tax. It was a property tax. So if you didn't own property, then you didn't pay anything to the state. Why would you have a say into what to do with the resources that you're not giving, that you're not spending? So yeah, if you have this kind of socialist approach that you think that you are benefited from the government, then yeah, you see it as, how that's awful. Only landowners could vote. No. They believed in a very limited government. We're going to use it for A, B, and C, and we all pay, so we all have a say into what to do with our money that you're stealing from us. It makes total sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, if the purpose of the government is to protect your property, if you don't own property, what are you doing? Like,
right.
how are you contributing? And it's no coincidence that, in the United States, the voting has become, I mean, we have just lowered the parameters for voting to the point that, like, really 18, like we lowered the voting age to 18. That makes
I was
no
dumb
sense.
as shit at 18.
I want to question the was there.
I was more dumb at 18 than I am currently dumb.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
So no. I do want to tag on to that idea of the landowners, because it's always sold to us, right, that, oh, this is just an example of, the wealthy elites reserving power for themselves, blah, 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 blah. But I saw some really interesting arguments that it was, you could also view it as, there's the idea that private ownership of property leads to greater stewardship, right? Mm-hmm. So rather than having the community park that nobody actually owns and nobody actually keeps up and nobody actually invests in, having it divided up into privately owned segments grants people a certain amount of investment into that property, and so they want to keep it up, they want their property to look nice, etc. And so if you look at it from that perspective, right, if you're not a property owner in the States, then you're not a fixed portion of it. You're not a fixed resident or a contributing member. You're sort of a peripheral body or somebody who's passing through, right? So you're not going to have the same level of investment in what takes place in the politics and whatnot, because, your lease could run out and you can go somewhere else. And at a very much more kind of layman blue collar level, I think it was Norm Macdonald, I think, had a line that I really liked, and it's if you want to understand why people hate the government, try to build something yourself on your own property.
Right.
And I find it really interesting. So I heard that and I thought it was, oh, that's kind of clever, because I had become a homeowner not too long before that. And, I got to like go before the zoning board to try to put up a fence. And there was a weird easement. And then there was this technicality. And it turned out had invested all this time and effort into it and it wasn't going to happen. I'm like, oh my God, this is the most ridiculous thing. Right. And it was interesting to look at my social media and my friends who were more, let's say, cavalier with some of this stuff about, oh, everyone should vote, everyone should be in, entitlement programs and blah, 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 all these type of things. And they had all these grand ideas for how stuff was to work. And I noticed there was a common thread that almost none of them owned a home. All of them were people that, rented apartments where somebody else does the upkeep, somebody else does the maintenance. Half the utilities are baked in with the cost and et cetera. And it's interesting when you buy your first house, how much insight you gain very early on. Like oh, wow, there's a lot more utilities than I thought were involved with this. And invariably within the first month or two, something generally expensive breaks. And you don't call a guy who comes to fix it and off he goes. You call a guy who gives you a quote on what it's going to cost to fix it, and then you cry, sometimes for a long period of time.
And then you cry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because it's key understanding of human nature, right? Something you're going to take better care of your stuff than someone's going to take care of it. I mean, we are self-interested creatures. We care about our stuff. I'm going to take better care of the house that I own than the house that, an apartment complex owns. Like, oh shit, I put a hole in the wall. Well, I'll just pay $50 and I know that they'll fix it, right? If I have to fix it on my own, I'm like, damn it, like I have to go out and buy the materials to fix this, or I have to hire somebody to come out who's going to charge me an exorbitant rate to come out and fix this. So yeah, it's the idea of stewardship for sure is threaded throughout all of this, and is something that, again, when you're not used to owning anything of your own, you're not used to being responsible for your own finances or for your own business for that matter. I mean, there's a reason why business owners are predominantly fiscally conservative, because they know what goes into running a business and how much it costs and how much the government takes from them.
As a former slumlord, I can completely attest for renters not giving a complete shit about other people's property.
Yeah. Why would they?
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't.
And I always find it interesting that, especially in light of COVID, there's all this, landlord isn't a job, rent shouldn't be a thing, blah, 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 blah. And, oh, well, the mortgage on this house is less than I'm paying in rent. That's a bunch of BS and blah, blah, blah. And it's interesting how they're completely oblivious to the concept that it's true. You are paying a premium because you're not confined to that, right? You do not own that property and all the maintenance therein. And you're not, if the economy tanks, when your lease runs up, you can pull the ripcord and bail, right? You're not stuck 30% underwater on this massive money hemorrhaging asset, right? And so, I don't know, it's just interesting to me, having been a former kind of lefty type person, and then as I age and gain perspective, just seeing, how much of it is a true morally driven or principled stance, and how much of it is just ignorance of alternate perspectives.
That whole adage of, when you're 20 and you're not a liberal, then you have no heart. If you're 40 and you're not a conservative, you have no brain. This
Right.
is what we're talking about, because there is like that initial thought process that you have when you're on the left of, oh, well, landlords shouldn't have to have all this rule or say or whatever. We should make it easier for the renters. We should make it, renters' rights or whatever. There's very simplistic thinking behind it. But the more you learn, the more you realize that most things are counterintuitive. And so when you set forth the law that makes it more difficult to be a landlord, or you take power away from landlords, you discourage landlording. When you discourage landlording, less people own properties that you can rent. When less people own properties that you can rent, the price of rent goes up because that's how supply and demand works. And so you should want more and more people to feel encouraged to be a landlord, because that's how your rent goes down. You make it so miserable to own property and rent to you that now it's, you know, $3,000 for a 1 bedroom in San Francisco or what have you.
Right. Well, and then you end up with, you know, housing shortages and all sorts of other things, and liquid housing issues, and then you have trouble with your you know, fluid workforce and contractor base because they're unable to find housing nearby and all that. I don't know. It is, you know, it goes back to the, if people are homeless, why don't we just give them houses argument, right? Like the simple solution often is not the best. Or I should say the seemingly obvious solution is not always the best.
To work on my transition skills, now that we're talking the economy, let's steer it into Adam Smith and his contributions. He's one of my favorites. I listen to Milton Friedman, so I kind of hear from Adam Smith secondhand. Obviously, The Wealth of Nations, but he also, like, I think people just think of him as the free market guy from back then, but he did have a lot of focus of morality, kind of a moral purpose behind free exchange. And, I think his understanding is kind of like the idea that the individuals pursuing their own self-interest is a much smarter system than individuals who think they can rule, who can design things for them. And it's kind of it's swarm intelligence versus the intelligence of a single bee who thinks he can tell the entire swarm what to do. It's not even close. It's such a genius system of just listen, do nothing, just let people pursue their own self-interests, and you will create a better society. And, you know, the understanding of the pricing system, you know, the importance of what that does on all levels. When things are scarce, prices go up. It encourages people to say, "Oh, I better produce that thing. I can make some money, you know, doing whatever." It obviously
it all happens organically, right? It doesn't require management.
Right.
It's self-organizing. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. Such a beautiful system, you know.
So this is a topic that I feel strongly about, and it ties into an area where I have at least some slight expertise, or it parallels some of my expertise at least. So in my professional capacity, I have spent a lot of time focused and oriented around risk mitigation. And so when I look at this concept of free market economics, it's not necessarily, in my opinion, it's not necessarily that it's a more intelligent system, but it's a way of decentralizing risk. And when you decentralize risk, you create more opportunities for success, and you lessen the penalties for failure, right? And the counter argument is always, well, if everyone just banded together and pushed, you know, to this one side, it'd be such a huge push and all that and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yes, you're right. If you harness the energy of you know, masses of people and direct them all in a singular direction, you can make a lot more progress. The trouble is somebody has to be the person that directs that mob, and that person can, and likely at some point will, be wrong. And so if you have a collection of independent actors, you have a seemingly random, but in my opinion, deterministic chaos, where it's going to go a little bit of everywhere, but it's going to kind of slowly orient itself in a positive direction because everyone's pursuing that independently. So unless you have some massive systemic flaw, it's going to generally orient itself in a positive direction. Not everyone's going to get a positive outcome. It's not always going to be overall positive, but in the aggregate, it's going to move in that direction. And the trouble with these centralized economies and this prospect of, you know, the one person telling everyone to row the canoe on the right-hand side is when they're wrong, then you end up with the Ukrainian famine and stuff like this, where oops, you know, the guy telling everyone to row made an oopsie, and now the entire canoe is going over a waterfall. right? And like it's catastrophic failure that's system wide and causes ripple effects that affect all kinds of other things. So in my mind, it's, you know, the sales pitch is always, oh, it's, well, this system is strictly better because it's smarter, and I think that's a good sales point. But I think the proper argument to take with these folks is it's not that the free market is this magical powerful thing. It's that it decentralizes risk, right?
Mm.
If the response to COVID was Trump sitting on a golden throne dictating what everyone did, somewhere his philosophy, whether it be oriented towards cities or oriented towards rural or whatever, somewhere it would fail catastrophically, and the losses for that area would be terrible, right? And but instead we have this wonderful federal system, kind of a republic, where each state and each locality dictates its own policies, and then you have you know, one person has the brilliant idea to force nursing homes to take COVID patients, and they have a pretty catastrophic failure, but it's confined to their little fiefdom. It's not suddenly every nursing home nationwide has become, you know, a tuberculosis hospital, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, why is Adam Smith considered an Enlightenment thinker? Right, he's considered an Enlightenment thinker because he's writing at the same time as these thinkers. He's meeting and talking with them and discussing with them, and he's taking this concept of, okay, I am going to look at the natural world and I'm going to empirically try to draw conclusions based from what I'm seeing occur in nature. And one of the things that we see occur in nature is animals, right, have self-interest, and animals barter, and animals negotiate, right, over resources. Those resources can be anything. It's not just money. It can be absolutely anything. But the value of those things comes from what we're willing to pay for them. And the value of those things comes from our bartering and our negotiating with the person who has what we want. And he's seen that human beings are inherently, they're motivated by self-interest. And while that can be negative, it also has positive aspects to it. And when you allow it to operate freely without that centralized force or without arbitrary rules or governments, it functions pretty well, and it allows people to go after what they want. And you don't have this chaos of one person is in control and has all of the resources and then has to figure out, okay, how do we pass out all of these different resources, right? He takes into account scarcity, right? Natural, sorry, my dog just hopped onto the bed, so that distracted me for a moment. I was keeping her away and she came back in. He takes into account natural occurrences that have to do with resources and nature, and says the best thing to do with all these things is to let human beings individually work it out amongst themselves without a lot of interference. And again, there's a reason why it works so well. I think we really wrongly associate all the time. We think capitalism, which isn't completely free market economics, it's a totally kind of different animal, right? He's advocating free market, laissez-faire, let the invisible hand, which just means really us and our desires and our self-interest and what we want, let that dictate the market, essentially.
Seems to be one of the fundamental differences between like the two ideologies is this understanding of human nature. It's like there's an ideology like Rousseau who views humans as clay that you can just mold. And you have these kind of utopian ideologues that say, you know what? Society isn't acting how I would like them to. And we need to create the perfect environment that takes the human being into its perfect form, into something that I want them to be. It's kind of I think it was a David Horowitz quote of, at the heart of every leftist is a tyrant screaming to get out. that's what that refers to. It's a bunch of people that haven't, and maybe they have good intentions, but they want their views imposed on the rest of society. And a part of the majority of the Enlightenment thinkers is the understanding of no. Humans are greedy or they're self-interested, and so they're going to be self-interested in various societies. So what kind of rules use those to drive a better system? You know,
Right.
is it, obviously socialism, for example, is not a good system when people are self-interested, but a system in which free trade and free exchange, in which the pursuit of your own self-interest means that you first must give in order to receive,
Right.
drives a better system. Because I want money, I want things, I want whatever, and if I have to get you to voluntarily give me those things, then my pursuit is making the world better. And so, yeah, that's Enlightenment thinking. That's an understanding of this is what we've observed from humans empirically, and then we're going to reasonably come up with a society that meets our goals and exists in the way that we want, knowing what we know about the human species. And so I guess what I didn't realize is how both of those views existed within the Enlightenment. I
Yeah.
always kind of envisioned the Enlightenment as not emotion. There's nobody that's led with emotion. There's nobody really led with this utopian ideologue. You did have utopian ideologues within the Enlightenment, and then you had others that were more rational and understood how understood human traits. You even have this difference with like collectivism versus individualism in the sense of you want the lower rungs of society to move forward, to gain wealth, to gain power. How do you do that? And the debate seems to be a top-down approach in which you revolution, you just fight it out, and then you steal wealth and redistribute it or whatever. Or the individual approach of like, no, you can't collectively rise to power and you can't collectively rise to wealth. It has to be done on an individual basis. So we need to get rid of any restrictions and whatever, and allow the individual to do it themselves. And that seems to be a debate that's happened throughout the Enlightenment. You had it with like, that seems to be Hobbes versus Locke. That seems to be Adam Smith and the physiocrats. And the physiocrats kind of become the lead to the French Revolution, and Adam Smith is more of an influence on the American Revolution, or on the United States, and even to like Webb Du Bois and Booker T. Washington.
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the same kind of argument of Du Bois thinking, no, you need to just assimilate, and we need to collectively rise up together as a group, versus Booker T. Washington's of like, no, listen, we live in the rules are pretty good, and so all we got to do is just establish our own communities, get skilled education, strong families, and the market will demand you as individuals. And if it might take longer, but this is how you ingrain yourself into society, and this is how you get a group to become wealthy, to become powerful. That seems to be a common theme, is that top-down approach versus bottom-up approach.
So this, in my opinion, is the core like yin and yang division. Like this is where the two sides, if you will, diverge on this core issue. And in my mind, it's a matter of, I guess, polarity would maybe be the best way to say it. And that's why I think it's the core divergence between the groups, where one essentially says, both are wrestling with the flawed nature of humanity. And one says that people are a product of their systems, and so we need to properly orient the system to not negatively impact people or not cause them to behave poorly. And so they're all of their philosophy and reasoning seems to be kind of oriented around that that constructionist or that nurture mentality, right? How the society you erect around people dictates what sort of people you will get. And then the other side views sort of the inverse polarity, where the key to tackling these moral failings is to imbue people with moral character, and then they will erect systems that behave more fairly and create a more favorable circumstance for people. And it's that core collectivist versus individualist, nurture versus nature, You know, the system dictates your morality versus your morality dictates the system. And that's, I think, the nexus from which all these other arguments radiate outward from.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all great points, and I think that they really also speak to the fact that there is a lot of diversity and variance within liberalism, right? Liberalism is a pretty broad political philosophy that sees different ways of achieving the same goal of freedom and human equality and self autonomy, and a society in which the individual gets to have more say in their life. And I think one of the reasons you're seeing such chaos and I would say moral incoherence in our politics and in our public discussions is because we're no longer having conversations between liberals. We're having conversations between liberals and then illiberals, right? As we've seen in the Enlightenment, there was a lot of diversity of thought over how do we live in a free state. What does the free state of man look like? What's man in true nature look like? What's the best way to erect a government in order to serve that serve man? And what we're now seeing is an impetus to kind of throw out the liberal impulse to pursue freedom and liberty and life as the primacy of all, and instead go back towards kind of a truly old model of no, the tribe is at the center of the world. The identity of this religion or this belief system is the center of the world. It's no longer the individual. So I think that's a big part of why we're in such a turning point, because we're no longer having a conversation between liberals, as many of us were historically throughout the United States. And as some of us still are. I think that's why you're seeing some people leave the Democratic Party, or you're seeing some people kind of leave leftism and say, I'm a classical liberal, like Dave Rubin, for example, because this is no longer a conversation among liberals. This is a conversation, a screaming conversation between liberals and, I mean, people with a tyrannical impulse, for lack of a better, I don't, how else would you describe it?
No, I would agree.
Spot on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's weird to me because it you know, maybe I'm showing my bias here, but like that liberalism movement seemed like such a quantum leap forward for humanity and for our culture. And I cannot fathom or understand where the impetus for this kind of wholesale rejection of it would come from. Like, I feel like the Enlightenment, at least pre, you know, the last 20 or 30 years, seemed like a universally hailed thing, you know, for the benefit of all mankind. And yet now there's seemingly a substantial portion of people who want nothing more than to see it obliterated. And I can't figure that out.
Racism.
Yeah.
What's that?
They blame racism on liberalism. That's a very short and boring and non-sexy answer, but that's the absolute truth. They blame all things bad on liberalism.
It's like you said, it's a conversation between liberals and illiberals, and liberals are seeking truth and getting to the bottom of it. That's kind of what the Enlightenment is that from
Right.
enough perspectives, we might not get the 100% pure picture, but we can get as clear a picture as possible. And the
Right.
postmodernist is it's a complete rejection. It's all subjective. You're all skewed. And so you're dealing with one group that is trying to be right, that is trying to be objective and come to the conversation. And then they're having a conversation with a group that just wants to win and have power, and that's it. And so they'll do anything to get there because if you're creating utopia, you'll do anything. So they'll lie, they'll call you racist, they'll dismiss you because they're out to destroy you. They're not seeking a debate. It's in Karl. I mean, it's written by Karl Marx. We don't seek debate. We're here to, to be violent and win and destroy. That's their game. That's their tools. We don't debate, which is something you tell a cult in a way, but yeah, they're not interested in debating with us, which is why. What does social media look like when they control it? It looks like censorship. It looks like don't exist because I want power. If we were in charge of social media, it would be free. Everybody could speak. We're confident in our views, so we want everybody to put theirs out there, and then we're willing to change, and two, we're confident that our ideas will spread because they've been, through trial and error, the most successful that the world has ever seen. The Enlightenment is a product of a massive game of trial and error, and it created the greatest society the world has ever seen. Is there a better system? Possibly, but none better than the products of the Enlightenment. Nothing that we've thought of as a human race, and they detest it. They hate it. They and a lot of them are brainwashed to destroy it. But there are people that fully buy in that hate everything about it.
Well, and listen, to be fair too, I think part of the onus has to be on us. And when I say us, I don't mean individually us, because we're not necessarily responsible, but the United States as an entity abandoned a lot of its Enlightenment ideals and beliefs a long time ago. And we started really giving up those ideas and those beliefs, especially in return for power, which you see historically happen all the time, right? You get a little bit of power and you're like, this is a lot better than being principled. This is a lot better than allowing people freedom. We made a deal with the devil. We've made a few, of course, but I think especially after World War II, and we kind of became the predominant superpower in the world, and we saw how we had lifted ourselves out of a crippling depression, and that we did that through war. We did that with war through almost, half the world. So, oh wow, this not only makes us the world superpower, it makes us incredibly rich. Why don't we capitalize on this and keep going? And to be fair to people who criticize the current state, we don't live in a free market. We have a very mixed economy that has so much state intervention in it, people don't even understand. We do not live in a truly free market. So a lot of people don't really know what it's like to live in that free American ideal that it once was, or it was maybe for a short period of time. They have this very skewed, I would say, imperialist viewpoint of America. And because of that, they then hate everything about it. And they don't see that the seeds of it are truly good and truly about freedom and liberty. So it's a shame, I think.
Well, and to not only have strayed that far from its roots, but then to teach our kids, yeah, no, this is capitalism. This is exactly what it is. And it's like we have strayed far from that particular path.
There's no nuance involved. It's either it's socialism or it's capitalism. It's not. There's no such thing as nuance or anything that's in between.
It's so stupid. It's so dumb.
We do live in a really dumb time in society right now.
I mean,
but that's why we need to have conversations like this, because these aren't happening enough and they're not visible enough. And yeah, I mean,
a couple of things you guys just said that really resonate with me. I just wanted to throw this out there. So speaking of what social media looks like when they're in control, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen it, and it's weird and it's creepy. Basically, like all my lefty friends, I don't know if there's like some website, like a single website, but they all share the same meme within about a week of each other. Like whenever a new news topic comes out, I look on all my classic liberal-y type friends, and everyone's got, here's my couple paragraphs of thoughts, here's my meme I made, here's this meme, here's that meme, whatever. All my lefty SJW friends, it's the same meme. And it's just like when it trickles down to them, like it's just this weird playbook that they all operate out of.
Has like the big white and yellow words, and it says like stuff that's mostly a lie, but there's like a little nugget of truth there.
So that's
And
the
like, and
Occupy
it constantly does
Democrats.
like comparatives. It's like, oh, this person's poor. Well, what about this person over here? It's always like, this and then that kind of arguments.
Yeah, and very text heavy. It's always
Yeah.
very text heavy.
Yeah, it's way too many words for a meme.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the left can't meme.
Yeah.
True though. This is so true though.
But the other point I wanted to bring up though is this conversation, and seeing that we're turning our back in some ways on the Enlightenment and all that. I have to wonder, do you think there were folks comparable to us sitting around the bathhouse in Rome having this conversation on the cusp of the Dark Ages?
Yeah, there most certainly were when the Republican era then turned into the imperial era in Rome. 100%. I mean, the entire reason we study the rise of Caesar and his influence then on the history of the Roman Empire is because they strayed from their ideals, and it caused a civil war, right? They had a civil war over the fact that they had strayed from these ideals that they had adopted from the Greeks, and that they thought that they could perfect in this republican form of government, and that worked really well for a little short period of time, and then they crashed upon. And again, for similar reasons. The United States and Rome have a lot of things in common. And it's not a coincidence that the founding fathers really looked to them for a lot of inspiration. Their iconography is all over American iconography. I mean, the Washington Monument looks like an obelisk, and that's not not a coincidence. And again, yeah, throughout human history, people have been having these conversations, and they've been saying, don't do it. You're going down the wrong path. Stay back. And, unfortunately, I think as we've seen too, majority of people are not going to stand up and say, hey, that's wrong. Majority of people are going to cave into the mob because they just want to live their life and not be bothered and survive. And they think, if I go with the crowd, I'll survive. And that's what people are doing now. They're just going with the crowd to survive.
Unfortunately, we're the group that you don't necessarily want to be. And the pattern is that we're going to be removed from social media. Our pages are going to be taken down. The network that we have between each other is going to be depleted. And the reality is going to be made to appear that all there is what there is on Reddit, for example, of just this absolute idiocy, this monolith, we all think exactly the same. That's what our world's going to look like. And unfortunately, we've gotten used to social media. So all of our stuff is there. We're not, oh, I guess I'll go to the library again. I'll go to get the encyclopedia for my information. And so now we're just going to rely on them for truth. We're going to rely on them for, oh, I guess they're not killing people in the streets. I'm not seeing it. I don't know. I thought I heard rumblings of them, killing people in San Antonio, but I guess not. And you start to see it in Australia, where there's social media shutdown and lockouts, and people that can only leave their house for an hour and have to show their papers, and it's scary because that's something that we relatively thought of as the free world, and we're seeing pregnant women getting arrested for social media posts, and we're becoming China, and it's not a good time to become China, because now we're going to be living in an era where the Stalins of the world have social media, have cameras everywhere, have digital currency, have AI, have everything. Imagine Stalin if he had the tools of today. That is fucking scary, and that is our future. That's where we're going very, very quickly. That's it's a full speed ahead, and every day, every month, every week, that we don't act, it gets more difficult to do so. If we wait a month, it's more difficult than if we wait a year, more difficult if we wait 3 years, and it's we're waiting on something. I don't know what we're waiting on. Unfortunately, the arsenal does not exist on our side, and we're just watching everything get torn apart. And for me personally, I just have to feel like a witness. I feel like I've had my thumb on the pulse for 4 years, and now it's like, fuck, I was right. I don't want to be right. I want to be wrong.
Right.
And it's, I lose sleep over it. Like I can't get over it. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go like, fuck. I just it bothers me on a consistent basis. And one bright light has been this group, you guys joining me on a pretty regular basis, and the conversation that we have. So I wanted to just give thanks and express my gratitude for just being able to have these deep conversations and talk about people that see the world through a similar eyes that I do, and not feel like, okay, I have to impose this on my family, or I got to pose this on my friend that doesn't give a shit, that is tired of me talking about this
Your dog.
kind of shit. And no, it's been a good outlet, and I think we need it. And whatever this becomes, whether it becomes our avenue to success and pursuing freedom and saving the United States, or if it just becomes the hey, they're cutting off our heads today chat, it serves multiple purposes. So
Can
I
I
say
provide? Can I
We're
provide
fighting a
comment?
battle with our hands tied behind our back, right? Because we're principle driven, unable to do the dirty fighting that's levied against us, right? Like the low level terrorism and forcing of motives and desires through violence. So it does feel a bit like playing our strings on the Titanic as the ship goes down. But if that's all that I have, then that's what I'll do. So
well, let's leave it with this. What would John Locke do?
he would write a very spicy treatise.
Yes,
All
he
right.
would.
I mean, what are memes, but if not spicy treaties?
Right? Yeah.
And
In the vernacular of the day, right? Yeah.
I
So,
feel I'm hoping to share the idea that, look, this is liberalism versus collectivism, and I would venture to say 90% of us Americans, we do value liberalism, but so many of us are caught up in a movement that we think is rooted in liberalism, and it is designed as a humanitarian crisis, but the fabric of that seeks to undo everything that is great about this country. And I just don't think people have grasped that. I was talking with somebody recently, and they said, I feel that maybe I get triggered when you say Marxism, because I'm starting to realize that I'm on that side. And I don't really want to be on that side. So, and that took a lot for that person to admit that and to say that. But,
Impressive.
as far as this group here, Jack, I want to express a gratitude as well, because I was thinking like, shit, man, what is it, me? Like, what's happening here? But seeing all of us from different parts in the country, seeing things and all seeing the same thing, it's comforting and scary all at the same time. So I'm just hoping that others will be aware of what is really going on. I tell people all the time, like, look, I don't play Republicans and Democrats. We can't play that anymore. There's a much bigger game at stake here. And once you figure out where you stand on that, then you'll understand where you have to fall in line, or at least in 2020,
Yeah, for sure. We definitely need enablers, because, like you said, it is easy to feel like you're crazy if you surround yourself by people who have succumbed to that ideology.
That's all the people in my workplace. It's the wokies and the me. And
Yeah.
I decided, like, I will not go along with that. That is not right. That is not truth. That is not what's best for human beings, and that's not what's best for Americans. and I have a distinctly pro-human being and pro-American stance. And those are controversial today. It's controversial to be pro-human being and pro-American.
That's
Well,
that's the definition of courage, is, being able to stand with unpopular truths in the face of popular lies.
Well, we'll see where it lands us.
Team Gulag, go.
I mean, but no, listen, like where I really gather hope is the fact that John Locke had no idea and could never conceive that his ideas would inspire the United States of America, right? There's no way he could have foreseen that. And I do think that America as a country is dying, and it will die, and it will be just another historical fact. But the ideas of freedom and liberty, those don't die. And those inspire new things. Those inspire new societies and new communities and new ways of living. And we just have to focus on that. We have to see that even if we don't see the fruits of our labor now, they will happen eventually, and they will live on through conversations like this, through writings, through spicy memes. They will live on, and people will pick up the mantle as they've done throughout history.
Plant trees whose shade we'll never sit in, right?
Right.
You know, Locke's ideas were brought here and really put into place 100 years later. You know, Locke's ideas in America, Thomas Paine was like, damn it, that's my boy. That's what we're doing. Yep. You know, 100 years later. So I'm hopeful for the ideas and the reemergence of ideas that this group and people like us all over the nation are putting out there. I just wish that the swell would have started earlier.
Oh.
But no time like the present.
Yeah, for sure. And I say we leave it there. It's been 3 hours.
Oh, God.
Hopefully we did the Enlightenment justice. My thought was we'd go from Enlightenment and then get into America, but we didn't get to America. But nothing wrong with that. We have a lot to say. So maybe this becomes a four-parter. But I like these conversations. We still haven't began our video editing to put clips and things together. I think as long as we do that, by the time we're done with This Is America, then that's appropriate. And like I said, I'm really excited. Like we have obviously the long march through the institutions is one I really want to do. I hope you guys all join me for it.
Yes.
And I'm really excited to tell that story. And then the fun one of elite pedophile rings.
Oh, so stoked.
The another one is feminism and the symbiotic relationship between men and women.
Oh.
And I don't know if you've seen one of the ladies in the main messenger with like 22 people in it reached out to one of her friends. So her friend converts woke females, essentially. Women who just are fervent feminists that can't get in relationships and just have a miserable life and they just hate it. I don't know how she gets in touch with these people, but she is like a life coach in a sense that helps women reestablish their femininity. And so she's essentially converting women into enlightenment,
trad wives.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm really fascinated to hear from her. I'm actually going to talk with her next week, and then that's project number 4, and that's something that she'll be a part of. So I don't know. They're fascinating stories, and it's I'm learning a lot just by asking the questions and hearing the answers, and it gives a lot of material to I'm going to look into that. I'm going to search that, and no, I think we're really going to like the final products of what this is. This is raw. It's cool that anybody's watching us at all, and kind of being a part of the conversation. But I'm excited to kind of put the videos out there and just, at the very least, always have something to refer back to myself of being like, okay, to my kid, my grandkids of like, what'd you do? I'm like, well, we tried making videos, and this is the story we told. And at the very least, it was a goodbye and farewell to the Enlightenment and freedom in the United States. But for what it
Somebody's
is,
somebody's going to discover a laptop one day, like 200 years with these videos on it, and they're going to
what is this?
restore liberalism.
Be a statue of Fox.
Oh God, I hope we can find better thought leaders than me.
Remind me, Jack, of the whole feminism thing, because I've been writing an essay on sexual anarchy, and so I'm like, my thesis in grad school was about Christian attitudes towards sexuality and the different viewpoints and stuff like that. So I'm like weirdly obsessed with sex, and especially like sex in the post-feminism era, which seems completely incoherent and a giant mess. So I'm like obsessed with that topic. So
Remind you about it, or
yeah, like
when we finally do it.
Yeah, or when you finally do it, or
So yeah, I'll
get me to finish. It'll help me finish my essay in time too. So
I don't know if we're gonna turn these into 3 hours and then do them in 4 parts. We might not get there
that's
because
true.
you want to be prepared for them and you want to give it your
Yeah. Yeah.
your best shot. But
I did.
I hope you guys join me for each one that we do. I think they're all fascinating stories. I hope you're
Yeah.
all along for the long march and pedophiles and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, for sure. I think I'll do what I did for this, like the This Is America. I'll set up a messenger, and then whoever's in it, because I like the smaller groups. When we were trying to do meetings and there's like 8, 9, 10 people, it's great meeting everybody, but I feel like people didn't get a chance to speak because it was just like, all right, I'm 1/10 of this conversation, and I'll just sit back. And so I like just having like, okay, a few people, and Jason and Grace. I know this is kind of your field. And Fox and I are we're kicking around.
Grateful to you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Right. And we'll kind of do the same thing. We'll just set up another messenger for the creation of the long march, because I like it being organized. I like having the outline and hearing from people to say like, hey, I know a lot about this. Throw that in there. Let's do that. I think it really makes for an interesting conversation. And I feel like just in the way of America, we're telling the story that I wanted to tell. I don't really care as much about like how do they win the Battle of Bunker Hill or something like that, but like explain to me why I'm sitting in America and why I have these views and why you're sitting in a classroom, how you got there, and talking about the Enlightenment is extremely important, and it's not done to the level that it needs to be done. And so it's nice for once to just be like, okay, this is it. This we're gonna get from. We just think of, and I thought this of just, okay, there were these really wise men that designed America. They were geniuses. It was a great idea, but they just built upon something that other people created. And it's nice to see like, oh, that's the reasoning for that. That's why that makes sense. And it equips people, because if you're arguing gun rights, the Second Amendment, you can say, no, I know exactly how this got here. It came from John Locke. It's for the purpose of dealing with a tyrannical government. It's not hunting. It's not anything else. I know it because it comes from the Enlightenment. And this is extremely important to understand the roots of our ideology and our arguments. So, and then we're going to get to the roots of their arguments and their ideology and where it comes from and how it infiltrates and how it subverts and how it worked from the outside, from the KGB to Communist Party USA to the postmodernists to the critical theorists and their advancements through the universities. And so this is just talking truth, and I'm extremely fascinated by it and grateful that people are giving me time and exchanging time with everybody else. I mean, so yeah, I'm extremely grateful for Fox staying up till 1 a.m. to make some clips of us.
Yeah.
So
got too much going on. I need to pick like 5 hobbies instead of 12.
That means you're a Renaissance man, though.
Yeah.
Or I'm just spread too thin. One of the two.
And who isn't these days? I mean,
Right.
mix. No, this has been awesome, and I'll be sure to share you some KGB stories during the. My dad was in intelligence during the '80s, so
Jesus.
he spent a lot of
Wow.
time in the Soviet Union and knew a lot of KGB officers. So.
I will aggressively devour anything you're willing to share on that type
Oh
of
my God, it's a real shame that he passed away 2 years ago. But it's a real shame because he would have been like he would have been all over this shit. So and yeah, he has quite this. He had the best stories. So
Yeah, I'm excited to hear him then. Maybe I'll create I'll create that message thread, throw the people in it, and then just we can kind of slowly as we're doing this,
yeah,
work on an outline, talk about this, and because once we're done with this, I'd like to go right into that story. Maybe take a week off to just kind of regroup and work on videos and whatnot, and then get right into it after that. So
sweet.
yeah. Well, it's 3.5 hours. So it's not too bad. And I'm gonna go to bed. So,
Take care, y'all.
all right. See you guys. Thanks for joining me. And see you next week.
Hey, everybody.
Peace, love, and free markets.